The gun barrel pressed cold against Caleb's temple, but his hand never trembled. Death had been chasing him for 5 years. Today, it might finally catch up. The stagecoach rocked violently as another bullet tore through the wooden frame. Passengers screamed, horses shrieked. But in the chaos, one woman sat perfectly still, her green eyes locked on Caleb's face, with an unnerving calm that made him wonder if she could see straight through to the hollowness inside him. This is the story of a man who'd forgotten how to live, until a schoolteacher taught him why survival wasn't enough. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a wasteland of cracked earth and skeletal Joshua trees that clawed at the colorless sky. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the 6-horse team, pulling the Overland Stage Company coach across the desolate terrain between Silver Ridge and Redemption Falls. Inside the driver's box, Caleb Vance sat with the reins wrapped loosely around his calloused hands, his weathered face showing no more emotion than the rocks scattered across the landscape. At 34, Caleb looked older. Deep lines carved his face like dry riverbeds. His dark hair, touched with premature gray at the temples, hung long beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, once a warm brown according to a photograph he no longer looked at, had faded to something closer to ash. People who met Caleb often remarked that he had the eyes of a man who'd seen too much. But the truth was simpler, and somehow worse. He was a man who no longer bothered to see anything at all. The rhythmic thunder of hooves and the creak of the coach's suspension were the only sounds in the vast silence. Caleb had driven this route 47 times in the past 2 years. He knew every dangerous pass, every spot where bandits liked to wait, every dried creek bed that could snap an axle if you weren't careful. The route from Silver Ridge to Redemption Falls was one of the most treacherous in the territory. 3 days of hostile terrain, scarce water, and the constant threat of ambush. Most drivers refused the assignment. Caleb volunteered for it. "Rider coming up fast from the south," the shout came from beside him. Caleb glanced at his shotgun guard, a nervous young man named Tommy Birch, who'd been hired 3 weeks ago and still jumped at shadows. The kid was maybe 22, with soft hands that had never known real work before he'd signed on with the stage line. He clutched the double-barreled Greener shotgun like it was a lifeline. Caleb had already noticed the dust cloud 10 minutes ago. His hand had drifted instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip, checked that it moved freely in the holster, then returned to the reins. Now he watched the approaching rider with the same detached interest he might give to a buzzard circling overhead. The horseman came into clearer view, a company courier, not a threat. Caleb's hand moved away from his weapon. "It's just Mitchell," he said flatly, "probably carrying updated freight orders." Tommy exhaled in relief, his knuckles white on the shotgun. "Don't know how you stay so calm, Caleb. Every shadow out here looks like death waiting." "That's because it usually is." The courier, a grizzled man named Pete Mitchell, pulled alongside the moving coach with practiced ease. His horse matched pace with the team as he pulled a leather dispatch case from his saddlebag. "Vance, got an update from the depot!" Pete had to shout over the thunder of hooves and wheels. Delayed passenger in Silver Ridge caught the morning relay. "They're holding at the Bitter Creek way station. You'll pick her up there." Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Delays meant complications. Complications meant staying alive required more effort. "We're already carrying 6, Caleb called back. "Coach is at capacity." "Company's orders, not mine. She paid premium fare, double rate for guaranteed arrival." Pete grinned. "Must be important. Or desperate." Without waiting for a response, Pete spurred his horse and veered off the trail, disappearing back toward Silver Ridge in a cloud of dust. Tommy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Bitter Creek's only an hour ahead. We making the stop?" "Company says stop, we stop." Caleb's voice carried no inflection, no opinion, just fact. The way station appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a squat adobe building with a corrugated tin roof and a weather-beaten barn that leaned slightly to one side. Bitter Creek was less a town and more a grudging acknowledgement that even in hell, travelers needed somewhere to water their horses and piss in relative privacy. A hand-painted sign declared it the Bitter Creek Station and Trading Post, though the trading post consisted mainly of overpriced whiskey and hardtack that could break teeth. Caleb guided the team into the station yard with mechanical precision, bringing the coach to a smooth stop despite the horse's eagerness for water. Before the wheels had fully settled, the station manager, a portly man named Gus, who'd been operating the depot for 15 years, rushed out with unusual urgency. "Vance, thank Christ you're here. I got your passenger waiting, but we got problems." Caleb secured the brake and climbed down from the box with the slow deliberation of a man in no hurry to hear bad news. "What kind of problems?" "Spotted 3 riders on the ridge about an hour ago. Been watching us ever since." Gus jerked his thumb toward the rocky hills to the east. "Could be nothing. Could be scouts for a bigger group." "They made any moves?" "No, just watching." Caleb's eyes tracked to the ridgeline. He saw nothing now, but that didn't mean much. A smart bandit knew when to be invisible. "We'll load up and move fast," Caleb said. "Get the team watered. 5 minutes." The coach's existing passengers were already climbing out, grateful for the chance to stretch their legs. Caleb paid them minimal attention as he conducted his routine inspection of the coach, checking wheels, examining the hitch, ensuring nothing had loosened during the rough morning ride. Tommy helped Gus's boy water the horses while the passengers milled about. Caleb knew all of them by name, though he'd never bothered to learn more than necessary. There was Samuel Pritchard, a portly banker from St. Louis with expensive clothes and a permanently nervous disposition. His wife Dorothy wore too much perfume and complained constantly about the dust. Reverend Joshua Albright was a thin, severe man traveling to establish a church in Redemption Falls. A young couple, the Hastings, Martin and Rebecca, were heading west with wide-eyed optimism and not enough money to sustain it. And finally, there was Marcus Webb, a professional gambler with quick hands and quicker eyes who'd been sizing up every other passenger since Silver Ridge. A typical cross-section of humanity pushing west, the greedy, the devout, the desperate, and the opportunistic. Caleb had seen hundreds like them. He'd see hundreds more. They were cargo to be delivered, nothing more. "Mr. Vance?" The voice came from the station doorway. Caleb turned. The woman standing there didn't look like she belonged in the brutal frontier landscape. She wore a simple but well-made traveling dress in deep blue, practical for the journey but clearly tailored with care. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun beneath a modest hat. She carried a single leather traveling bag and a wooden case that might have held books or documents. But it was her eyes that caught Caleb's attention despite himself, clear, intelligent, and completely unshaken by the desolate surroundings. She met his gaze directly, without the flutter of uncertainty he'd seen in countless other women traveling alone. "I'm Eliza Hart," she said, walking toward him with steady steps. "I believe you're expecting me." Caleb nodded curtly. "Coach leaves in 4 minutes. There's no room inside. You'll ride up top with the luggage." Most women would have protested. Eliza simply glanced at the coach roof, calculated something in her head, and nodded. "That will be fine. I'll need assistance with my trunk. It's inside the station." "Tommy," Caleb called to his guard, "secure the passenger's luggage." As Tommy hurried inside, Caleb found himself studying Eliza more closely than he usually bothered with passengers. She was probably in her late 20s with fine features that would have been considered handsome in polite society. But there was something else, a quality he couldn't quite name. Not fragility disguised as strength, but genuine steel beneath the civilized exterior. "You heading to Redemption Falls?" he asked, more out of habit than interest. "Yes, I've accepted a position as a schoolteacher there." "There's no school in Redemption Falls." "There will be." She said it with such calm certainty that it almost sounded like fact rather than hope. Caleb felt the faintest flicker of something, curiosity maybe, or recognition of a particular kind of foolishness he'd once known himself. He crushed it immediately. "Redemption Falls is a mining camp, Miss Hart. It's rough, violent, and full of men who have no use for education." "A woman alone there?" He paused, choosing words that might penetrate her apparent optimism. "It's not safe." "Neither is staying where I was." She met his eyes again, and this time he saw something deeper there. Not naivety, but knowledge of darkness matched with a refusal to be ruled by it. "We don't always get to choose our circumstances, Mr. Vance. Only how we respond to them." Before Caleb could respond, Tommy emerged from the station struggling with a medium-sized trunk. Gus helped him secure it to the coach roof while Eliza climbed up to her designated spot with surprising agility. "All aboard," Caleb called out, his voice carrying across the station yard. "Redemption Falls, 3-day journey. Next stop is Devil's Bend, 8 hours from now. Anyone who's not in the coach in 2 minutes gets left behind. The passengers scrambled back inside. Caleb and Tommy climbed into the driver's box. As Caleb released the brake and took up the reins, he glanced back at Eliza. She'd positioned herself securely among the luggage, her traveling bag clutched in her lap, her eyes scanning the horizon with alert interest. "Hold on tight," he told her. "The terrain gets worse before it gets better." "I've survived worse than rough terrain, Mr. Vance." Something in her tone made him pause for just a fraction of a second. Then he cracked the whip, and the 6-horse team lurched forward, pulling the coach back onto the trail toward Redemption Falls. The afternoon sun climbed higher as they pushed deeper into the wasteland. The trail, generously called a road, wound through increasingly hostile terrain. Rocky outcrops rose on either side like broken teeth, creating narrow passages where the coach barely fit. The temperature climbed past 100 degrees, turning the air itself into a shimmering adversary. Inside the coach, the passengers suffered in relative silence, broken occasionally by Dorothy Pritchard's complaints about the heat and dust, or the Reverend's mutterings about divine providence. Outside, Tommy scanned the rocks nervously, his earlier confidence eroded by the oppressive landscape. Caleb drove with mechanical efficiency, his mind empty of everything except the immediate requirements of navigation. This was how he preferred to exist, in the narrow present moment, making decisions about horses and wheels and terrain, never looking forward to any future beyond the next hour, never looking back at the past that had burned away 5 years ago. The fire had come in October, unusually late in the season. He'd been in town buying supplies for the ranch, their ranch, his and Sarah's, with their 2 daughters, Emma and Caroline. He'd been gone maybe 4 hours. When he'd ridden back over the ridge and seen the smoke, he'd known. Some part of him had known immediately, even before he'd spurred his horse into a gallop, even before he'd reached the smoldering ruins and found everything he'd loved reduced to ash and bone. The cattle had scattered, the barn had collapsed, the house was a blackened skeleton, and in what had been their bedroom, he'd found what remained of his family. The official investigation concluded it was a kitchen fire that spread too fast, trapped them too quickly. Just an accident, just fate. Just one of those tragedies that happen in the frontier where help is far away and fire moves faster than prayers. Caleb had buried them in a grove of cottonwood trees on a hill overlooking where the ranch had stood. He'd stayed just long enough to sell the land to a neighbor who promised to maintain the graves. Then he'd walked away from everything, the memories, the plans, the entire future he'd been building, and started driving stages on the deadliest routes he could find. People thought he was brave, they thought he was tough. They didn't understand that he was simply waiting for the universe to finish what it had started. "Caleb," Tommy's urgent whisper snapped him back to the present. The young guard was staring at something ahead, his hand tightening on the shotgun. Caleb saw it too. In the narrow pass ahead, maybe 200 yards distant, a small rock slide had partially blocked the trail. It could have been natural. This terrain was unstable enough. But the placement was too convenient, too perfectly positioned to force the coach to slow down. His eyes swept the ridges on either side. Nothing visible. But that meant nothing. "Could be natural," Tommy said hopefully. "Could be." Caleb's hand drifted to his Colt. "Probably isn't."
Septimisus.
He had 3 choices. Try to find another route that might not exist and would certainly add hours to their journey. Stop here and wait to see if anything developed, or push through and trust his instincts and his aim if trouble showed itself. Caleb chose the 3rd option. He always chose the 3rd option. "Check your loads," he told Tommy quietly. "Don't aim at anything unless I tell you to. If shooting starts, protect the passengers, not me." But that's an order. He kept the team moving forward at a steady pace, not so fast that they'd appear panicked, not so slow that they'd make easy targets. As they approached the rock slide, Caleb's senses sharpened. Every shadow became a potential threat. Every sound carried significance. The coach reached the narrow gap. Caleb guided the horses through carefully, wheels grinding against loose stones. They were committed now, too narrow to turn around, exposed on both sides. That's when he heard it, the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. "Hold it right there, driver." The voice came from the rocks above and to the right. Caleb brought the coach to a smooth stop, his face showing no reaction. Tommy's breathing accelerated, but to his credit, the young guard kept the shotgun pointed down. 3 men emerged from concealment, one on each ridge and one directly ahead, all holding rifles trained on the coach. They wore dust-covered trail clothes, bandanas covering the lower halves of their faces. Not professional soldiers or lawmen, just opportunistic predators who'd found prey. The man ahead, their leader, presumably, stepped closer. He was tall and rangy, with cruel eyes above his bandana. "Now that's a fine coach," he drawled. "Bet there's all sorts of interesting cargo inside, valuables, money, maybe some pretty company." His eyes flicked upward, noticing Eliza for the first time. "Well now, looks like we hit the jackpot, boys." Inside the coach, Caleb could hear the passengers' fear, Dorothy's whimper, Samuel's sharp intake of breath, the Reverend's whispered prayer. "We're carrying mail and passengers," Caleb said calmly. "Nothing worth dying over." "I'll be the judge of that." The bandit gestured with his rifle. "You and the boy climb down real slow. Everyone out of the coach. Let's see what you got." This was the moment Caleb had lived through dozens of times before. Sometimes the bandits took what they wanted and left. Sometimes they got greedy and people died. Sometimes they got nervous and people died. Sometimes they were just mean and people died anyway. Caleb didn't particularly care which version this would be. Death had been stalking him for 5 years. If it wanted to collect today, he was ready. But as he started to climb down, something unexpected happened. "Gentlemen," Eliza's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Clear, steady, and utterly calm. All eyes turned to her as she stood up among the luggage, her traveling bag still clutched in her hands. "I believe you're making a significant miscalculation," she continued, speaking as if she were addressing a classroom rather than armed criminals. "This coach is carrying 7 passengers, 2 crew members, and minimal cargo of value. Whatever you might take would need to be divided among your group, assuming you have additional members watching from concealment, and judging by your tactics, I'd estimate at least 2 more men positioned on our flanks." The bandit leader stared at her, momentarily confused by her clinical assessment of their ambush. "So your take per person would be modest at best," Eliza continued. "Meanwhile, we're on a route regularly patrolled by both company security and territorial marshals. An attack here would be investigated, descriptions would be circulated, and while your bandanas provide temporary anonymity, I've already noted that you, she pointed at the leader, have a distinctive scar on your left hand, you have unusual silver conchos on your saddle, and your rifle has a wrapped stock that suggests a previous injury." The bandit's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You threatening me, woman? I'm providing a cost-benefit analysis." Her tone never wavered. "The smart play is to let us pass. The stupid play is to rob us and spend the next year looking over your shoulder for a noose. Your decision, of course, but I thought someone should mention that intelligence is always preferable to violence." For several long seconds, nobody moved. Caleb found himself frozen in place, not by fear, but by sheer astonishment. He'd seen brave people before, soldiers, lawmen, desperate men with nothing to lose, but he'd never seen someone face death with such calculating composure, turning a robbery into a negotiation with nothing but words and unshakable nerve. The bandit leader's hand tightened on his rifle. Caleb's hand moved toward his Colt, ready to draw if this went wrong. Then the bandit laughed, short, sharp, and bitter. "You got balls, lady. I'll give you that." He lowered his rifle slightly. "What's your name?" "Eliza Hart." "Well, Miss Hart, you just talked yourself and these people out of a robbery. Not because you're right. You ain't. We could take everything and be in Mexico before any marshal knew our names. But because I respect audacity, and it's been a long time since anyone surprised me." He gestured to his men, who lowered their weapons with obvious reluctance. "Move along, driver. But you might want to invest in a lock for that lady's mouth. Words like that'll get her killed in less forgiving company." Caleb didn't wait for a second invitation. He cracked the whip, and the team lunged forward, pulling the coach through the gap and away from the ambush site. His heart, which he'd thought had stopped feeling things like relief or fear, hammered in his chest. They traveled another mile before Tommy finally exhaled. "Holy hell," the young guard breathed. "I thought we were dead. I thought they were going to shoot us all," and he trailed off, then looked back at Eliza with something like awe. "Miss Hart, that was either the bravest or the craziest thing I've ever seen." "It was neither," Eliza said calmly, settling back among the luggage. "It It was simply a matter of reading the situation and presenting an alternative narrative. Most violence occurs because people fail to consider their options. Caleb said nothing, but his mind was churning in ways it hadn't for years. He'd seen plenty of people face danger, some with courage, others with desperation, most with terror. But Eliza Hart had faced it with something entirely different, with calculation and composure and an absolute refusal to accept the role of victim. It reminded him of something. Someone. It reminded him of Sarah. His wife had been like that, calm in crisis, clear-headed when others panicked, capable of seeing solutions where others saw only problems. When Emma had fallen from the barn loft and broken her arm, it was Sarah who'd set the bone, while Caleb held their screaming daughter. When their first winter had nearly starved them out, it was Sarah who'd figured out which plants were edible and kept them alive until spring. When a wildfire had threatened the ranch 3 years before the fatal one, it was Sarah who'd organized a firebreak that saved their home. Sarah had been strong, really strong. Not the kind of frontier woman strength that people romanticized, but real steel that showed itself in quiet competence and unbreakable will. And Caleb had loved her for it, had built his entire life around her, had believed that strength like that was permanent, that it could protect the people he cared about from the random cruelty of the universe. The fire had taught him otherwise. Strength didn't matter, courage didn't matter, love didn't matter. The universe didn't care about any of it. Sarah had been strong and brave and capable, and she'd burned anyway. Emma had been 6 years old with her whole life ahead of her, and she'd burned anyway. Caroline had been just 4, barely old enough to understand the concept of tomorrow, and she'd burned anyway. So Caleb had stopped believing in strength, stopped believing in courage, stopped believing in anything except the cold fact that everyone dies, usually badly, and the only control you have is whether you care about it when it happens. He'd been doing fine with that philosophy for 5 years. But now, sitting in the driver's box with his hands on the reins and Eliza Hart's calm voice echoing in his memory, he felt something he hadn't felt since the fire, the dangerous stirring of involuntary emotion. He crushed it immediately. "Devil's Bend is still 6 hours away," he announced, his voice flat and professional. "We'll push through without stopping. I want distance between us and those bandits." Nobody argued. The sun was setting by the time they reached Devil's Bend, a marginally larger settlement than Bitter Creek. The way station here had an actual inn, a ramshackle 2-story building with a dining room that served food only slightly more appetizing than the hardtack at Bitter Creek. Caleb supervised the team change with his usual methodical efficiency while the passengers stumbled into the inn, exhausted by the long day's travel. Eliza climbed down from the coach roof with the same grace she'd shown climbing up, brushing dust from her dress with practical efficiency. "Miss Hart." She turned to find Caleb standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands in an unconscious gesture of respect he immediately regretted making. "Mr. Vance." "What you did back there." He paused, searching for words he rarely needed. "That was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. You're the second person to suggest those might be different things." A slight smile touched her lips. "I prefer to think of it as pragmatic. Violence should be a last resort, not a first response. Out here, the last resort is usually too late. Perhaps, but I found that most people respond to reason if you give them the chance." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those unnervingly direct eyes. "You expected them to kill us." "I expected them to try. And you were prepared to fight. It's my job." "I don't think that's why." She said it quietly, without accusation, but the words hit like a physical blow. "I think you were prepared to die. That's different." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right, I don't." She hefted her traveling bag. "But I recognize a man running from ghosts when I see one. We have that in common." Before he could respond, she walked toward the inn, leaving him standing in the darkening yard with Tommy's curious eyes on him and a feeling he couldn't quite name spreading through his chest like poison or medicine. He wasn't sure which. The inn's dining room was crowded with their group and a handful of local travelers. Caleb took a corner table alone, as was his habit, eating the stringy beef and watery beans without tasting them. Tommy joined some freighters at the bar, swapping stories and lies. The other passengers clustered together, their earlier terror transformed into an adventure tale they were already embellishing.
Eliza sat alone at a small table near the window, writing in a leather-bound journal by candlelight.
She ate absently, her attention focused on whatever she was documenting. Caleb found his eyes drifting toward her repeatedly, irritated with himself each time. She's quite something, isn't she? Caleb looked up to find Marcus Webb, the gambler, standing beside his table with a whiskey in each hand. Without waiting for an invitation, Webb sat down and slid one glass toward Caleb. "Not interested," Caleb said. "Wasn't asking." Webb leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes glittering with amusement. "I've been reading people for 15 years, Vance. It's how I make my living. And you're one of the most closed-off individuals I've ever encountered, like a book that's been nailed shut. If you're trying to make conversation, you're failing. Just making an observation." Webb sipped his whiskey. "But even a sealed book gets opened when the right key comes along. That schoolteacher, she rattled you back there. I saw your face when she talked down those bandits." "I don't rattle." "Everyone rattles. The question is why." Webb's smile was knowing. "She reminds you of someone." Caleb's hand clenched around his fork. For a moment he considered telling Webb exactly where he could shove his observations. But starting a fight would require caring enough to follow through, and Caleb was too tired for that. "Mind your business, Webb." "Always do. But out here, everyone's business tends to overlap." Webb stood, taking his whiskey with him. "Fair warning, though. Redemption Falls is no place for a woman like her. Whatever she's running from, she's running towards something worse. Someone should tell her." "Not my concern." "Isn't it?" Webb's smile turned sad. "You keep telling yourself that, driver. Maybe eventually you'll believe it." He walked away, leaving Caleb alone with his uneaten food and unwanted thoughts. What? That night Caleb couldn't sleep. The inn provided rough accommodations, shared rooms with thin mattresses and thinner walls. Caleb had paid extra for a private corner, as he always did, but privacy didn't silence the ghosts. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of wind rattling the window frame. In the darkness, the memories came uninvited, as they always did. Emma's laugh, high and bright, like sunlight made sound. Caroline's small hand in his, trusting absolutely in his strength to protect her. Sarah's voice, reading stories to the girls by lamplight, while Caleb mended tack, half listening but completely content just to be surrounded by the sounds of his family. The smell of smoke, the heat of flames, the silence that came after. Caleb sat up, his breathing harsh in the quiet room. This was why he preferred to stay numb. Emotion led to memory. Memory led to pain. Pain led nowhere except more pain. He pulled on his boots and left the room, seeking the cold night air and the emptiness of the desert sky. The inn's small porch was deserted except for one figure. Eliza Hart stood at the railing, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, looking up at the stars with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. He almost turned back, but she'd already noticed him. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked quietly. "Never sleep well on the road." It was half true. "I find traveling actually helps." She didn't look at him, keeping her eyes on the stars. "When I'm moving, the past has a harder time catching up." Caleb said nothing, but he moved to stand beside her at the railing. The night was cold after the day's brutal heat, the temperature dropping 40 degrees now that the sun was gone. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "May I ask you something, Mr. Vance?" "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Well, why do you drive this route? Everyone says it's the most dangerous in the territory. Most drivers refuse it. Yet you volunteer." "Pays well." "I don't think that's why." Caleb turned to look at her properly. In the moonlight, her features were softened but no less direct. Those eyes still saw too much. "You have a habit of making assumptions about people you barely know," he said. "I have a habit of observing people carefully and drawing logical conclusions." She finally met his gaze. "You're not afraid of death, Mr. Vance. If anything, I'd say you're waiting for it. That's not the attitude of a man who wants the money." "Maybe I'm just good at my job." "You are, but that's not the same thing." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Who did you lose?" The question hit like a punch to the chest. Caleb's hands gripped the railing hard enough that his knuckles went white. "That's none of your—" "My husband died 3 years ago," Eliza said quietly. "Cholera outbreak. He was a doctor. He worked himself to exhaustion trying to save others. And in the end, he couldn't save himself. She pulled her shawl tighter. For a year afterward, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, couldn't see any point in continuing. The world seemed like a cruel joke, and I was furious at everyone who couldn't see it. Caleb's anger drained away, replaced by something more complicated. What changed? He heard himself ask. I realized that surviving wasn't the same as living, and that Thomas wouldn't have wanted me to spend the rest of my life as a ghost of myself. She smiled slightly, sadly. So I started looking for a way to matter again, to build something rather than just endure. That's why I'm going to Redemption Falls, not because it's safe or smart, but because it's purpose. Building a school in a mining camp won't bring your husband back. No, but it might give his death meaning, and mine. She looked at him again. What gives your life meaning, Mr. Vance? Nothing. The word came out harder than he intended. There is no meaning. People live, people die, and the universe doesn't care either way. The only difference is whether you waste time pretending otherwise. I used to think that too, Eliza said softly. I was wrong. You weren't. Caleb pushed away from the railing. You're just not ready to accept it yet. But out here in places like Redemption Falls, you'll learn. The frontier doesn't care about your purpose or your plans. It just takes and takes until there's nothing left. He walked back inside before she could respond, his heart pounding, anger and grief, and something else churning in his chest. He didn't want her understanding, didn't want her compassion, didn't want the dangerous suggestion that there might be another way to exist besides the numb emptiness he'd cultivated for 5 years. But as he lay back down in his narrow bed, sleep still refused to come, and Eliza's words echoed in his mind. What gives your life meaning? Nothing, he told himself again, nothing at all. But for the first time in 5 years, the answer felt less like truth and more like habit, and that terrified him more than any bandit's rifle ever could. Dawn came too early and too bright, the sun clawing its way over the eastern horizon like an unwanted guest. Caleb had maybe slept 2 hours in scattered increments, his rest broken by dreams he couldn't quite remember, but that left him feeling hollowed out. He went through his morning routine with mechanical precision. Check the new team, inspect the coach for damage, inventory supplies, calculate the day's route, and likely problems. Tommy appeared looking fresh and eager, the resilience of youth still intact. The passengers filtered out gradually, the Pritchards complaining about the accommodations, the Reverend sermonizing about perseverance, the Hastings holding hands with the doomed optimism of young love. Eliza emerged last, looking composed despite what must have been an equally uncomfortable night. She caught Caleb's eye briefly, a moment of acknowledgement, nothing more, then climbed efficiently back to her spot among the luggage without a word. All aboard, Caleb called. Today's leg is the hardest, crossing the Sorrow Basin. It's open terrain, which means we'll be visible but also harder to ambush. We stop once at Hangman's Creek for water, then push straight through to Fort Defiance by nightfall. Questions? How did Hangman's Creek get its name? Young Martin Hastings asked, then immediately looked like he regretted asking. 3 men tried to rob a stage there in '71, Caleb said flatly. Passengers were a sheriff's transport. All 3 bandits hanged from the same cottonwood tree, hence the name. Any other questions? Silence. Mount up. The Sorrow Basin earned its name honestly. It was a vast, featureless expanse of alkali flats that reflected the sun like a mirror, turning the landscape into a white-hot fever dream. No shade, no landmarks, just endless empty space where the horizon shimmered and distance became meaningless. It was also, paradoxically, one of the safer stretches of the journey. The openness made ambushes nearly impossible. Any approaching riders would be visible for miles. But the heat was brutal, and the alkaline dust coated everything, making breathing difficult and water precious. 3 hours into the crossing, the heat had transformed the coach into a mobile oven. Inside, the passengers suffered in miserable silence. Even Dorothy Pritchard had stopped complaining, too exhausted by the temperature to waste energy on words. On the driver's box, Caleb and Tommy squinted against the glare, bandanas pulled up over their mouths and noses against the alkaline dust. Behind them, Caleb could hear Eliza shifting occasionally, but making no complaints. How much farther to Hangman's Creek? Tommy asked, his voice muffled by the bandana. 2 hours. Maybe less if the team holds up. They looked tired. They're tough. They'll make it. It was true. The six-horse team was flagging under the brutal conditions, but they were experienced stage horses, selected specifically for their endurance. They'd make it to water, rest briefly, then push through to Fort Defiance. It was a punishing schedule, but that was frontier travel. Everything out here was about endurance and calculation, about measuring what could be survived versus what couldn't. Caleb understood that arithmetic intimately. He'd been performing it on himself for 5 years. "Can I ask you something?" Tommy said, breaking Caleb's thoughts. "You asking or telling me you're going to ask?" "Asking permission, I guess." "Go ahead." "Why'd you get so angry last night? I saw you and Miss Hart on the porch. You walked away looking like you wanted to hit something." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "Not your concern." I know, just, she seems nice and you seem—" Tommy trailed off, searching for words that wouldn't get him fired. "You seem like maybe you could use someone to talk to." "I don't need anything except for you to do your job and mind your own business." "Right, sorry." Tommy fell silent for a moment, then couldn't help himself. "It's just, everyone says you lost your family, and I figure that's got to be hard, and maybe—" "Tommy," Caleb's voice was dangerously quiet, "if you value your position with this company, you'll stop talking. Now." The young guard wisely shut his mouth. They traveled the next hour in tense silence. Caleb regretted his harshness. Tommy was a good kid, trying to be kind in his clumsy way. But kindness was worse than cruelty out here. Kindness made you soft, made you care, made you vulnerable to the 1,000 ways the frontier could destroy you. Better to be hard. Better to be closed. Better to be the sealed book that Marcus Webb had described, nailed shut and locked away where nothing could touch the ruined pages inside. Hangman's Creek appeared on the horizon like salvation, a thin line of green in the white desert, marking where underground water came close enough to the surface to sustain a few hardy cottonwood trees. One of them, gnarled and ancient, still bore the faint scars where ropes had worn grooves into its branches. Caleb guided the team to the creek's edge and called the halt. The passengers practically fell out of the coach, stumbling toward the water. Caleb had to bark orders to keep them from making themselves sick by drinking too fast. 5-minute stop, he announced. Water the horses first, yourselves second. Fill canteens. Do your business behind the rocks if you need privacy. We leave at the 5-minute mark, whether you're back or not. While Tommy supervised the team's watering, Caleb walked the perimeter, his eyes scanning the surrounding landscape more from habit than real concern. The Sorrow Basin was empty in all directions, nothing but shimmering alkali and heat distortion. When he returned to the coach, he found Eliza already back in position, her canteen refilled, her face flushed from the heat, but her composure intact. "You handle the heat well," he said before he could stop himself. "I grew up in Texas. I'm well acquainted with suffering." She said it lightly, but there was truth beneath the humor. "Though I'll admit this is testing even my tolerance. Gets worse before it gets better. Fort Defiance is cooler, higher elevation, but we have to cross the rest of the basin first. I'll survive." She paused. "I'm sorry if I overstepped last night. Your life is your own business." Caleb should have accepted the apology and moved on. Should have reinforced the walls. Should have maintained the distance that kept him safe. Instead, he heard himself say, "My wife and daughters died in a fire. 5 years ago. I wasn't there. Couldn't save them. Couldn't do anything except bury them and try to figure out how to keep breathing." Eliza's expression shifted, not to pity, which he would have hated, but to a kind of recognition. Grief, acknowledging grief. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That's an unimaginable loss." It was. Caleb stared at the horizon. "For a while I thought about following them. Would have been easier than this, but I was too much of a coward to pull the trigger myself. So instead, I started looking for ways to let the frontier do it for me. By taking the most dangerous routes. By not caring if I lived or died. Turns out, when you don't care, you get good at surviving. Ironic, really. Or perhaps your family's love gave you strength you don't even realize you have." Caleb's laugh was bitter. "Love didn't save them." "Didn't save me either. Just left me with ghosts and empty years." "Is that what you think?" Eliza shifted forward slightly, her eyes intense. "That love is weakness because it can be lost?" That caring about anything makes you vulnerable? I think love is a lie we tell ourselves to make existence bearable. And when it's taken away, you realize it was always temporary, always fragile, always destined to end in pain. You're half right, Eliza said. Love does end. People die. Loss is inevitable. But that doesn't make the love any less real or meaningful while it existed. Your wife and daughters, they were real. Your love for them was real. The life you built together mattered, even if it ended too soon. Mattered to who? They're gone. I'm here, and nothing I do will ever change that. It matters because it shaped who you are, because you carry them with you, even now, especially now. She held his gaze. You think you're dead inside, Mr. Vance, but if you were truly dead, you wouldn't be angry. You wouldn't hurt. You'd just be nothing. The fact that you feel pain means you're still alive. You're still fighting, even if you tell yourself otherwise. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to reject her words, but something in them resonated with a truth he'd been avoiding, the uncomfortable recognition that 5 years of numbness hadn't actually erased feeling, just buried it. Time's up, Tommy called from the front of the coach. Everyone mounted. The moment broke. Caleb turned away from Eliza's knowing eyes and climbed back into the driver's box, grateful for the excuse to end the conversation. But as they pulled away from Hangman's Creek and pushed back into the blinding white desert, Eliza's words echoed in his mind. You're still alive. You're still fighting. Was he? Or was he just a ghost going through the motions, too stubborn to admit he died 5 years ago alongside everyone he'd loved? He didn't know the answer. And for the first time in a very long time, that uncertainty felt less like weakness and more like possibility. The thought terrified him. Fort Defiance rose from the prairie like a promise half-kept, weathered wooden walls surrounding a cluster of buildings that served as both military outpost and civilian way station. The American flag hung limp in the still evening air as Caleb guided the exhausted team through the gates, just as the sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. The fort's commander, Captain Gerald Morrison, stood waiting in the courtyard with 2 of his soldiers. He was a compact man in his 50s, his uniform dusty but pressed, his face carved into permanent lines of skepticism earned through 20 years of frontier service. Vance, Morrison said as Caleb brought the coach to a halt, heard you had trouble at the Narrows yesterday. 3 men, rifles, standard ambush formation. News travels fast, Caleb said, climbing down. Pete Mitchell rode through this morning with the mail relay. Said your passengers talked down a gang of bandits without firing a shot. Morrison's eyes found Eliza as she climbed down from the luggage platform. That true? More or less, Caleb admitted. Morrison approached Eliza with the careful courtesy of a man who'd learned to respect frontier women who survived this far from civilization. Ma'am, I'm Captain Morrison. Pete said you performed an act of either tremendous courage or tremendous foolishness yesterday. The third person to suggest those aren't the same thing, Eliza said with a slight smile, brushing alkaline dust from her skirts. I prefer to think of it as applied logic, Captain. Applied logic doesn't usually work on bandits. Then perhaps more people should try it. Violence seems to be the default out here when conversation might suffice. Morrison's weathered face cracked into something resembling a smile. You must be the schoolteacher heading to Redemption Falls. Miss Hart, correct? You're well informed. It's my job to know who's traveling through dangerous territory, especially women traveling alone to mining camps with reputations like Redemption Falls. His expression turned serious. I feel obligated to tell you that place is no environment for a lady. It's rough, violent, and getting worse. The Silver Strike brought every kind of desperate man west, and precious few of them have any interest in civilization. Then it sounds like exactly the kind of place that needs a school, Eliza said calmly. Morrison glanced at Caleb, who kept his expression neutral. Vance, you planning to tell her what she's walking into? Told her yesterday. She didn't listen. I listened, Eliza corrected. I simply disagree with your assessment that danger should dictate decisions. If everyone avoided difficult places, nothing would ever improve. Improvement requires survival, Morrison said. And survival in Redemption Falls requires more than optimism and good intentions. Fortunately, I have considerably more than that. Eliza's tone remained pleasant but firm. Now, If you'll excuse me, Captain, I'd like to secure accommodations for the night. We are staying overnight, aren't we, Mr. Vance? Standard schedule puts us here until dawn, Caleb confirmed. Excellent. Good evening, gentlemen. She collected her traveling bag and walked toward the fort's guest quarters with steady steps, leaving Morrison and Caleb watching her go. That's a remarkable woman, Morrison said quietly. That's a stubborn woman, Caleb replied. Same thing, usually. Out here especially. Morrison turned to face him fully. You know what's waiting in Redemption Falls? The Garrison brothers have been squeezing the independent miners, the company men are pushing back, and everyone with a gun is choosing sides. Last report I got said there were 3 shootings in 1 week. A schoolteacher walking into that situation, not my problem, Caleb said, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Morrison gave him a long, measuring look. Keep telling yourself that. Maybe it'll become true. He gestured to his soldiers. Get the stage team into the stable. Fresh horses ready at first light. Vance, you know where the barracks are. Get some sleep. You look like hell. Feel like it too, Caleb muttered, but Morrison had already turned away to deal with other duties. The fort's accommodations were sparse but clean. Wooden bunks in a long room that housed travelers, soldiers on leave, and anyone else who needed shelter for the night. Caleb claimed his usual corner bunk, as far from other people as the space allowed. Tommy bunked near the door, already making friends with a group of young soldiers eager to hear stories about the ambush. The other passengers had scattered to various corners, the Pritchards paying premium for the commander's guest room, the Reverend choosing a bunk near the small chapel, the Hastings settling close together with the unconscious intimacy of newlyweds. Marcus Webb had disappeared, probably to find whatever card game was running in the enlisted men's quarters. Caleb lay on his bunk, hands behind his head, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams. His body was exhausted from the brutal day's drive, but his mind refused to settle. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eliza's face, not with the pity that made him angry, but with that penetrating understanding that was somehow worse. You're still alive. You're still fighting. Was that what this feeling was? This uncomfortable awareness of something beyond the numb routine he'd perfected? This unwanted recognition that another human being had seen past his defenses and identified the pain he'd been trying so hard to ignore? He didn't want to be alive. Being alive meant feeling things, and feeling things led inevitably to loss. Better to be the ghost he'd made himself into, going through motions, fulfilling obligations, existing but not living. Except Eliza was right about one thing. Ghosts didn't hurt like this. Ghosts didn't lie awake wrestling with thoughts they didn't want to think. Ghosts didn't care about stubborn school teachers walking into dangerous situations, and Caleb very much did not want to care about Eliza Hart. Hey, Vance! He opened his eyes to find Marcus Webb standing beside his bunk, bottle of whiskey in hand. What? Caleb said. Thought you might want a drink. You seem tense. I'm fine. You're lying, but that's your business. Webb settled onto the adjacent bunk uninvited. Had an interesting conversation with our school teacher friend over dinner. She's quite something. Everyone keeps saying that because it's true. Smart, composed, totally committed to this insane plan of building a school in a place that'll probably kill her within a month. Webb took a swig from the bottle. Reminded me why I stopped believing in noble causes. They tend to get people killed. Then why are you telling me this? Because you're thinking about it. About her. About whether someone should do something. Webb's sharp eyes studied him. And I'm here to tell you the same thing I told myself 15 years ago when I watched a good woman walk into a bad situation. You can't save everyone. Trying will just get you hurt. Caleb sat up slowly. You have a point, or are you just here to share your wisdom? My point is that she's going to die in Redemption Falls unless someone looks out for her. And the only person on this coach who might be capable of doing that is you. But doing that would require you to start caring again, which is clearly the thing you're most afraid of. Webb stood, leaving the bottle on the bunk. Just thought you should know what choice you're facing. Drink helps, but it doesn't actually solve anything. He walked away, leaving Caleb with the whiskey and thoughts that were becoming harder to ignore. Outside, the fort settled into its nightly routine. Guard changes, low conversations, the distant sound of horses in the stable. Caleb eventually gave up on sleep and went outside. seeking the cool night air and the illusion of solitude. He wasn't surprised to find Eliza at the wall, looking out over the darkened prairie. The woman seemed to share his insomnia, or perhaps she simply preferred her own company to the crowded barracks. "You're making a habit of this," he said, approaching the rampart. "Of what?" "Standing outside at night, thinking too much." "Guilty on both counts." She glanced at him. "You too, apparently." Caleb leaned against the wooden railing, the rough timber solid under his hands. The prairie stretched away into darkness, broken only by the distant glow of stars reflected in scattered water holes. "Captain Morrison was right, you know," he said. "Redemption Falls is worse than you're imagining. The silver brought every kind of violence west, claim jumpers, company enforcers, outlaws looking to take from miners too weak to fight back. There's no law except what men with guns decide. A woman alone there, especially one trying to build something civilized." He trailed off. "We'll be vulnerable," Eliza finished. "I know. I'm not naive, Mr. Vance. I understand the danger." "Then why go? There are other places that need teachers, safer places." "Because safety wasn't what I was looking for." She turned to face him fully. "After Thomas died, I could have stayed in Philadelphia. Could have found a comfortable position in an established school, lived a quiet life, grown old without risk or challenge. But that would have been existing, not living. And I decided that if I was going to continue breathing, it should be for something more than just safety. Something more like getting killed trying to teach children in a mining camp? Something more like mattering, making a difference, even a small one, proving that civilization can take root anywhere if someone's willing to plant the seeds." Her voice was steady, certain. "You think that's foolish? I think that's how good people die." "Good people die anyway. The question is whether we die for something or for nothing." Caleb wanted to argue, but the words caught in his throat. Because wasn't that exactly what he'd been doing for 5 years? Dying for nothing, one empty day at a time? "Your wife," Eliza said quietly. "What was her name?" He shouldn't answer, shouldn't open that door, but something in the night and the solitude and Eliza's patient silence pulled the truth out of him. "Sarah, her name was Sarah." His voice roughened. "And our daughters were Emma and Caroline, 6 and 4 years old. Emma wanted to be a teacher, actually, used to line up her dolls and teach them arithmetic. Caroline just wanted to be wherever her sister was." "Tell me about Sarah." "Why?" "Because you loved her. Because talking about people we've lost keeps them alive in a way. Because I think you need to say her name out loud to someone who'll actually listen." Caleb's hands gripped the railing hard enough that splinters bit into his palms. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to retreat behind the walls that had kept him safe from exactly this kind of vulnerability. But he found himself talking anyway. Sarah was strong, really strong. Not just physically, though she could work as hard as any man. Strong in her mind. She saw problems as puzzles to solve, not obstacles to fear. When Emma was born early, and the doctor said she might not survive, Sarah nursed her for 3 days straight, didn't sleep, didn't stop, just kept our daughter alive through sheer will. He paused, memory washing over him. She had this way of laughing at adversity, like hardship was just another challenge to overcome. I used to think nothing could break her. Until the fire. Until the fire. The words came out flat, dead. I was in town buying supplies, gone maybe 4 hours. The neighbor who helped bury them said it must have started in the kitchen, spread too fast. They were trapped upstairs. Sarah probably tried to get the girls out the window, but he couldn't finish. Eliza's hand settled lightly on his arm. Not grasping, not demanding, just present. "You blame yourself. I should have been there. To die with them? How would that have been better? It would have been something. Anything except standing at their graves knowing I failed them." "You didn't fail them, Caleb." She used his first name unconsciously, the formality dropping away. Fire is chance, tragedy is chance. You can't protect people from every possible danger no matter how much you love them. Then what's the point? The question burst out of him, raw and angry. What's the point of loving anyone if you can't protect them? If all the strength and planning and care in the world can't stop random cruelty from taking everything? "The point," Eliza said softly, is that love exists at all, that for however long you had them, you were a family, that Emma knew she was loved enough to feel safe teaching her dolls, that Caroline trusted you to protect her, even if you couldn't save her from everything, that Sarah built a life with you that mattered, even though it ended too soon. It didn't matter enough. It mattered everything. It shaped who you are. It's why you're still angry, still hurting, still fighting against the idea that anything means anything. Because if it didn't matter, you wouldn't care this much about its loss. Caleb turned away from the railing, away from her perception. You should get some rest. We leave at dawn, and tomorrow's leg is long. Caleb, good night, Miss Hart. He walked away before she could say anything else, before her words could dig any deeper into wounds he'd spent 5 years trying to cauterize. But as he lay in his bunk, staring at the darkness, he couldn't stop hearing her voice. It mattered everything. Did it? Or was that just another comfortable lie to make loss bearable? He didn't sleep that night, just lay there wrestling with ghosts and questions that had no good answers, while the hours crawled toward dawn and the continuation of a journey he suddenly wanted to delay. Because the closer they got to Redemption Falls, the closer Eliza came to the danger waiting there. And despite everything, despite his determination not to care, despite 5 years of deliberate numbness, he found himself caring anyway. And that terrified him more than any bandit or any memory ever could. Dawn broke cold and clear, the high desert air sharp enough to cut. Caleb was already at the coach when the first light touched the fort's walls, conducting his pre-journey inspection with more thoroughness than strictly necessary. Anything to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. The fresh team stamped and snorted, eager to run after a night in the stable. Tommy emerged yawning, followed gradually by the other passengers. Only Eliza appeared fully alert, her traveling bag already packed, her expression composed. She didn't mention their conversation from last night. Neither did Caleb. Last leg, he announced to the assembled group. 12 hours to Redemption Falls if we don't hit problems. The route follows the canyon rim most of the way, scenic but exposed. Stay alert, stay hydrated, and for the love of all that's reasonable, don't lean out the windows to look at the view. People fall every year. How encouraging, Dorothy Pritchard said acidly. Is there anything about this journey that isn't designed to kill us? The parts where you stay in the coach and follow instructions, Caleb replied. Mount up. Captain Morrison appeared as they were loading, a leather dispatch case in his hands. Vance got official mail for the Redemption Falls mining office. Company contract says you carry it. Put it in the boot. Morrison hesitated. There's also this. He pulled out a separate envelope, sealed with wax. Private correspondence to the Territorial Marshal's deputy in Redemption Falls. James Garrett. You know him? Caleb's expression tightened. I know him. He's good people, trying to bring some law to that mess. Morrison handed over the envelope. This is confidential. Don't let anyone else handle it. Understood. Caleb tucked the envelope inside his jacket, acutely aware of Eliza watching the exchange. We ready, Tommy? Ready, boss? They rolled out of Fort Defiance as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, the coach lighter with fresh horses but heavier with the knowledge that this was the final stretch, the final day, the end of a journey that had somehow become more complicated than simple transportation. The canyon rim route lived up to its reputation, spectacular and terrifying in equal measure. To their right, the land dropped away in sheer cliffs that plunged hundreds of feet to a river far below. To their left, rocky hills rose in layers of red and gold stone, hiding countless places where trouble could wait. But the view was undeniably magnificent. The canyon stretched for miles, carved by eons of water into fantastical shapes. Eagles soared below the rim, their hunting cries echoing off stone walls. The morning light painted everything in warm colors that would have inspired artists if any had been foolish enough to travel this route. It's beautiful, Eliza said from behind them, her voice carrying wonder. It's dangerous, Caleb replied automatically. Things can be both. Tommy grinned. Miss Hart's got a point. I mean, look at that. How often do you see something like this? Every time I drive this route, it never gets safer just because it's pretty. But despite himself, Caleb found his eyes drawn to the canyon's beauty. It had been years since he'd really looked at the landscape, really seen it as anything other than terrain to navigate and threats to assess. Now, with Eliza's quiet appreciation as a counterpoint to his cynicism,
He couldn't help but notice the way the light played across the stone, the way the river far below caught the sun like silver thread. Sarah had loved beautiful things. She'd insisted on planting flowers around the ranch house, even though the climate was harsh and the work was hard. She'd said that beauty mattered, that it fed something in the soul that work and survival alone couldn't nourish. Caleb had thought it was impractical at the time. Now, looking at the canyon, he wondered if she'd been right about more than he'd ever acknowledged. "You're thinking about her," Eliza said quietly. Caleb startled slightly. He hadn't realized she could see his face from her position. "What makes you say that?" "Your expression. You get this look sometimes, like you're somewhere else, somewhere that hurts to visit, but you can't help going back." "You're entirely too observant, Miss Hart." "Occupational hazard. Teachers learn to read faces. It's how we know when students are actually listening or just pretending." She paused. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." "Fair enough." She didn't push, which somehow made it easier to continue. Sarah loved beautiful things, Caleb heard himself say. Always said that survival wasn't enough, that people needed beauty and purpose and meaning, not just food and shelter. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I thought she was being impractical, romantic. I was wrong." "She sounds remarkable." She was. Too remarkable to die in a kitchen fire, too strong to be taken by something as stupid as chance and bad luck. His hands tightened on the reins. "That's what I can't forgive. Not the universe, not fate, not even the fire itself. I can't forgive how meaningless it was, how random, how all her strength and intelligence and will didn't matter when it counted." "It always mattered," Eliza said, "even if it couldn't save her. The fact that random tragedy can strike doesn't invalidate the value of what we build. It just makes it more precious because it's temporary." That's a poet's answer, not a practical one. Is there a difference? The most practical thing humans do is create meaning in the face of meaninglessness. That's how we survive, not just physically, but spiritually. We build, we love, we make things matter, even knowing they'll end. That's not impractical. That's the core of what makes us human. Caleb wanted to argue, but the words rang true in a way that was hard to dismiss. Because wasn't that exactly what Sarah had done? Created meaning and beauty in a harsh place, built something valuable despite knowing nothing lasted forever? And wasn't that exactly what Eliza was trying to do in Redemption Falls? "You really believe that?" he asked. "I have to. Otherwise, Thomas's death was just waste. Our marriage was just temporary comfort, and the school I'm trying to build is just delusion." She shifted position slightly. "I choose to believe that temporary doesn't mean meaningless. That building something good, even if it only lasts a little while, is worth the effort and the risk." "Even if it kills you?" "Even then, because the alternative is what you've been doing, surviving without living, existing without purpose. And I'd rather die trying to matter than live without meaning anything at all." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs. Because she was right. That's exactly what he'd been doing for 5 years. Surviving as a form of slow suicide, existing as a kind of revenge against the universe that had taken everything. And it was hollow, empty, a waste of whatever years he had left. But the alternative meant risking pain again, meant opening himself up to caring, to loss, to all the ways life could hurt when you let it matter. "You think too much, Miss Hart," he finally said. "Probably, but someone has to, since you've spent 5 years trying not to think at all." Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. The moment shattered as Tommy suddenly grabbed his arm. "Caleb, riders, 11 o'clock!" Caleb's hand dropped to his colt even as his eyes tracked to where Tommy was pointing. 3 riders had emerged from the hills to their left, moving fast and parallel to the coach. Not approaching directly, but definitely pacing them. "Friends of yours?" Tommy asked nervously. "Out here, assume no one's friendly until proven otherwise." Caleb assessed the situation rapidly. The riders were well-mounted and well-armed, rifles visible in saddle scabbards. They weren't making aggressive moves yet, but their presence was deliberate. "Keep the shotgun ready, but don't aim it. Let's see what they want." The riders closed the distance, now close enough that Caleb could make out details. 3 men, rough-looking, but not obviously bandits. The leader was a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and hard eyes. He raised a hand in a signal that could have been greeting or warning.
Caleb slowed the team slightly but didn't stop. The riders matched pace, staying about 30 yards off. "Afternoon," the bearded leader called out. "You carrying anything valuable?" "Mail and passengers," Caleb called back. "Nothing worth dying over." "That's what they all say." The rider grinned without humor. "Problem is, we have instructions to check every coach coming into Redemption Falls. New policy from the Garrison brothers. They own the mining rights on most of the claims now, and they want to know who's coming and going." "I don't work for the Garrison brothers. I work for the Overland Stage Company." "That's so." "Well, the Garrisons say otherwise. They say anyone traveling through their territory needs their approval." The rider's hand drifted casually toward his rifle. "So why don't you stop that coach and let us have a look inside, just to make sure you're not carrying anything problematic?" Caleb's mind raced. The Garrison brothers were exactly the kind of men Captain Morrison had warned about, claim jumpers who'd used violence and intimidation to consolidate control of Redemption Falls. If they were now stopping coaches and demanding inspection, it meant the situation had deteriorated even faster than expected. "The stage company has federal contracts," Caleb said evenly. "Interfering with mail delivery is a hanging offense." "Only if someone reports it. And if you're not carrying anything problematic, you got nothing to worry about, right?" Behind him, Caleb heard movement inside the coach, passengers realizing something was wrong. He caught a glimpse of Eliza in his peripheral vision, alert but calm. This was different from yesterday's ambush. These men weren't robbers looking for quick profit. They were enforcers establishing control, which made them both more dangerous and potentially more reasonable. "What exactly would be problematic?" Caleb asked. "Weapons. Large amounts of money. People the Garrisons don't want in Redemption Falls." The rider's eyes swept over the coach. "We got a list of names. Mining company officials, federal inspectors, troublemakers. Just need to check if you're carrying any of them. And if we are, then those particular passengers will need to find another destination. The others can continue." He said it casually, but the threat was clear. Anyone on the Garrison's list would disappear into those hills and never be seen again. Caleb's hand was now resting on his Colt's grip, hidden from the riders by the angle of his body. Tommy's knuckles were white on the shotgun. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move and shooting would start. "I've got a better idea," a voice said from inside the coach. The door opened and Marcus Webb stepped out onto the running board, his hands clearly empty and visible. "Gentlemen, I believe we can resolve this without unpleasantness." "And who the hell are you?" the bearded rider demanded. "Marcus Webb, professional gambler and generally reasonable man." Webb's smile was easy, confident. "I've played cards with Jack Garrison a few times. Won some, lost some, good player, smart man. And I'm thinking a smart man like Jack wouldn't want trouble with the federal stage company over a routine inspection that's going to turn up nothing interesting." The riders exchanged glances. "You know Jack Garrison?" "We're acquainted, not friends exactly, but we respect each other's skills, and I know he's got bigger concerns than who's riding a stagecoach." Webb's tone turned confidential, conspiratorial. "See, the word in the last 3 towns is that the territorial marshal is planning a cleanup of Redemption Falls, sending in deputies, maybe soldiers from Fort Defiance. Now, if I were Jack, I'd be focused on preparing for that, not harassing legitimate travelers and giving federal authorities more reasons to take him seriously." The bearded rider's expression shifted, uncertainty creeping in. "The marshal's sending people?" "That's the rumor. Could be true, could be talk. But either way, stopping a federal mail coach right now? That's the kind of attention Jack probably doesn't want." Webb shrugged. "Of course, you boys do what you think is right. I'm just offering a gambler's perspective on the odds." The riders conferred quietly among themselves. Caleb kept his hand on his weapon, ready for this to go either way. Beside him, Tommy barely breathed. Finally, the bearded leader spat in the dust. "Fine, but you tell anyone who's thinking about making trouble in Redemption Falls that the Garrisons run that town now. Federal authority stops at Fort Defiance. Past that, their law is the only law that matters." "Duly noted," Webb said pleasantly. The riders wheeled their horses and rode back into the hills, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. Webb climbed back into the coach, his easy confidence evaporating the moment he was out of sight. "Jesus," he muttered. "That was closer than I'd like." Caleb exhaled slowly and got the team moving again, faster now. That was good thinking, Webb, quick and smart. I'm a gambler. Reading the room and knowing when to bluff is literally my job. Webb's voice carried through the window. But Vance? Whatever's happening in Redemption Falls, it's worse than anyone's saying. Those men weren't just outlaws, they were organized, controlled, acting under orders. I know. Caleb's jaw tightened, which means this is going to be a problem for anyone trying to establish civilization there. His eyes flicked briefly to where Eliza sat, now visible through the coach window. She met his gaze with that same calm certainty that both impressed and frustrated him. She was walking into a war zone, and despite everything he'd told himself about not caring, about staying numb, about letting people face their own consequences, Caleb realized with uncomfortable clarity that he couldn't just deliver her to Redemption Falls and drive away. Not anymore. Something had shifted over the past 2 days. Some wall had cracked. And now, whether he wanted it or not, Eliza Hart's fate had become his concern, which meant he was going to have to figure out how to keep a stubborn schoolteacher alive in a town controlled by violent men who saw education as a threat to their control. The canyon rim rolled on beneath the wheels, beautiful and dangerous, while the sun climbed higher and Redemption Falls drew steadily closer with each passing mile. Redemption Falls appeared on the horizon like a scar on the landscape, a sprawling chaos of tents, wooden structures, and mud streets carved into the hillside where silver had been found 18 months ago. Smoke rose from a dozen forges and smelters, darkening the afternoon sky. Even from a distance, Caleb could hear the cacophony of industry, hammers on metal, shouts of men, the rumble of ore carts on wooden tracks. It was bigger than the last time he'd been here. Twice as big, maybe more. Growth like that meant money flowing, which meant violence wasn't far behind. Money always brought predators. "Welcome to civilization," Tommy said dryly, staring at the ramshackle town. "That's generous," Caleb replied. The main street, if it could be called that, was a river of mud churned by wagon wheels and boots. Buildings lined both sides in haphazard fashion, their construction ranging from professional carpentry to barely standing lean-tos. Saloons outnumbered legitimate businesses 3-1. Men moved through the streets with the hard-edged urgency of people chasing fortune or running from failure. Caleb guided the team carefully through the chaos, avoiding drunks and ore wagons with practiced skill. Eyes followed the stagecoach, some curious, others calculating. He recognized the look. Predators assessing prey, wondering what cargo might be worth the risk of stealing. The stage depot sat at the far end of town, a sturdy building that predated the Silver Strike. The company agent, a grizzled man named Walt Henderson, stood waiting with 2 armed guards, a recent addition that spoke volumes about the town's deterioration. "Vance," Henderson called out as the coach rolled to a stop. "Heard you had trouble on the route." "Nothing we couldn't handle." Caleb set the brake and climbed down, his legs stiff from the long day's drive. 3-day journey, no casualties, mail intact, standard delivery. Standard except for the part where your passengers talked down bandits and got stopped by Garrison's men. Henderson's expression was grim. "News travels fast out here. You made some people nervous." "Good. Nervous people make mistakes." Caleb began unhitching the team while Tommy helped passengers disembark. "You got accommodations arranged?" "Hotel's full up. Best I could do was rooms at the boarding house for the ladies and the preacher. Everyone else is on their own." Henderson lowered his voice. "Fair warning. The Garrison brothers heard there's a federal letter on this coach. They've got men watching. Whatever you're carrying, deliver it fast and don't advertise." Caleb's hand instinctively went to his jacket where Captain Morrison's sealed envelope rested. "Where's Garrett staying?" "Marshal's office, 2 blocks north. But Caleb, be careful. The Garrisons have this town locked down. Deputy Marshal or not, Garrett's 1 man against 30. "Noted." Caleb turned to help with the luggage, acutely aware of Eliza standing nearby, taking in Redemption Falls with the same measuring gaze she'd applied to everything else on the journey. Samuel Pritchard was already complaining loudly about the accommodations while his wife fanned herself dramatically. The Hastings looked overwhelmed, their earlier optimism cracking under the reality of frontier life. Reverend Albright clutched his Bible and surveyed the town with an expression caught between determination and despair. Marcus Webb appeared at Caleb's elbow, speaking quietly. "I'm staying at the Silver King Saloon. They run rooms upstairs for regulars. If things get interesting, that's where I'll be. Appreciate the heads up. One more thing. Webb's eyes cut to Eliza.
She's going to need protection. This town eats idealists for breakfast. If you're planning to just drop her off and leave. I know. The words came out harder than intended. I'm working on it. Webb nodded and melted into the crowd, leaving Caleb to face the problem he'd been avoiding for 3 days. Eliza had collected her trunk and traveling bag, standing composed amid the chaos like a lighthouse in a storm.
The contrast between her quiet dignity and the rough violence of Redemption Falls was almost painful to witness. Miss Hart, Caleb said, approaching her, where exactly were you planning to stay? I have arrangements at the boarding house. A woman named Mrs. Chen runs it. We corresponded by letter. She's expecting me. Good. That's good. Mrs. Chen's solid people. Caleb hesitated, the words he needed to say catching in his throat. But you need to understand something. This town is worse than I described. Worse than you're prepared for. The Garrison brothers control most of the mining claims through intimidation and violence. They see education as a threat because educated miners are harder to cheat. A woman trying to start a school here will face resistance. I understand. Her calm never wavered. But resistance isn't the same as impossibility, Mr. Vance. It just means the work will be harder. It means you could get killed. I could get killed crossing the street. Life is risk. She met his eyes. I appreciate your concern. Truly. But I didn't come this far to turn back at the first sign of difficulty. Caleb wanted to shake her, to make her understand the real danger she was walking into, but he recognized the set of her jaw, the steel in her eyes. She'd made her decision long before arriving here, and words wouldn't change it. At least let me walk you to the boarding house, he said. Make sure Mrs.
Chen knows you arrived safely. Something softened in Eliza's expression. That would be kind. Thank you. Tommy volunteered to carry her trunk, and the three of them made their way through Redemption Falls' muddy streets. Men stared openly at Eliza, some with mere curiosity, others with expressions that made Caleb's hand drift toward his Colt. He positioned himself between her and the worst of the crowd, his presence alone enough to discourage most approaches. The boarding house was a 2-story structure near the edge of town, cleaner and better maintained than most of the surrounding buildings. A small sign declared it Chen's Respectable Boarding House, Ladies Welcome. Mrs. Chen herself appeared at the door as they approached, a compact Chinese woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. Miss Hart? She asked, her English accented but clear. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for accommodating me on short notice. Your letter said you come to teach. We need teachers here. Too many children running wild while parents dig for silver. Mrs. Chen's gaze shifted to Caleb, assessing. You the stage driver who brings her? Caleb Vance, ma'am. You protect her on the journey? I did my job. Good. She need protection here too. This town is not safe for women alone. Mrs. Chen's directness was refreshing after days of innuendo and implication. You stay nearby? I'm driving back to Fort Defiance tomorrow. Then tonight you eat dinner here. 6 o'clock, no charge. Anyone who protects teachers earns meals at my table. She said it with such finality that arguing seemed pointless. Caleb found himself nodding. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Chen ushered Eliza inside, leaving Caleb and Tommy standing in the street. She's terrifying, Tommy said with admiration. She's practical. Probably the most sensible person in this whole town. Caleb glanced at the setting sun. Get the team settled and fed. I have a delivery to make. The marshal's letter? Don't advertise it. Right. Be careful, boss. Caleb made his way through town toward the marshal's office, hyper-aware of eyes tracking his movement. Henderson had been right. Word had spread about the federal correspondence. In a town controlled by men who operated outside the law, federal attention was a threat. The marshal's office was a small building squeezed between a general store and a blacksmith shop. A wooden sign declared it Territorial Marshal, Deputy Station. Through the window, Caleb could see a man sitting at a desk, writing by lamplight. He knocked once and entered. James Garrett looked up from his paperwork, his hand dropping instinctively to the revolver at his hip before recognition set in. He was maybe 35, lean and weathered, with intelligent eyes and the careful movements of a man who'd survived by staying alert. Caleb Vance, heard you were driving in today. Garrett's voice carried the accent of back east education layered over frontier pragmatism. Also heard you had an interesting journey. Interesting is one word for it. Caleb closed the door and pulled Morrison's sealed envelope from his jacket. Captain Morrison sent this. Said it was confidential. Garrett took the envelope, his expression darkening as he examined the seal. You read it? Wasn't addressed to me. Smart man. Garrett broke the seal and read quickly, his jaw tightening with each line. Finally, he set the letter down with deliberate care. The territorial marshal is sending 4 deputies to assist me. They'll arrive within 2 weeks with federal authority to investigate the Garrison brothers' operations and restore legitimate law. The Garrisons know about this? They suspect, hence their men stopping coaches and checking passengers. Garrett rubbed his face tiredly. 4 deputies sounds good until you realize the Garrisons have at least 30 men on their payroll, plus another 20 or 30 miners and drifters they can call on when needed. We'll be outnumbered 10 to 1. So what's the plan? Survive until reinforcements arrive. Document everything the Garrisons do illegally. Build a case that'll hold up in territorial court. He laughed bitterly. Assuming any of us live that long. Caleb studied the deputy marshal. James Garrett was good people, the kind who believed in law and justice even when both were in short supply, the kind who'd die trying to do the right thing in a place where wrong usually won, the kind Caleb used to be before the fire taught him that principles died as easily as people. There's something else you should know, Caleb said. A woman came in on my coach, schoolteacher named Eliza Hart. She's planning to establish a school here. Garrett's eyebrows rose. A school in Redemption Falls? I tried talking her out of it. Didn't work. She's staying at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. That's either very brave or very foolish. Third person to say that? Starting to think they're the same thing. Caleb moved toward the door, then paused. The Garrisons will see education as a threat. Educated minors are harder to cheat, harder to control. They'll go after her. Probably. Along with everyone else trying to bring civilization to this cesspool. Garrett's expression turned thoughtful. You planning to stick around? I drive back to Fort Defiance at dawn. That's what I thought you'd say, but you delivered that letter personally instead of sending your guard. And you came here to warn me about the schoolteacher instead of just washing your hands of the situation. Garrett leaned back in his chair. Seems like maybe you care more than you're admitting. I'm fulfilling my contract obligations. Nothing more. Keep telling yourself that. Garrett smiled slightly. But when you decide to stop lying to yourself about what you actually want, there's a badge and deputy's authority waiting. We could use a man like you. I'm not that man anymore. Aren't you? Garrett gestured at the closed door. You just walked through a hostile town to deliver a letter that puts a target on my back, then warned me about a civilian who needs protection. That sounds like someone who still cares about doing the right thing, even if he's trying real hard to pretend otherwise. Caleb left without responding, his thoughts churning. The problem with men like Garrett was that they saw things clearly, cut through bullshit and self-deception with uncomfortable precision, just like Eliza did, just like Sarah used to. He was surrounded by people who refused to accept his carefully constructed fiction that he was dead inside. The sun had set by the time he returned to the depot. Tommy had the team settled and was cleaning tack with the methodical care of a good employee. Caleb helped finish the work, grateful for the simple physical labor that required no thought. You going to Mrs. Chen's for dinner? Tommy asked. Seems rude to refuse. You want company, or is this a private thing? Caleb considered. Having Tommy along would make it less intimate, more professional. But something in him resisted that impulse toward safety. Go get drunk with the freighters, he said. I'll be fine. You sure? I survived 3 days on the trail with her. I can handle one dinner. Tommy grinned knowingly, but didn't comment, which Caleb appreciated. The kid was learning when to push and when to shut up. Mrs. Dutt. Chen's boarding house dining room was small but immaculately clean, the table set with simple but elegant dishware that seemed impossible in a rough mining town. 6 other residents were already seated, 2 older miners, a young couple who might have been merchants, and a widow woman who helped Mrs. Chen with the cooking. Eliza sat at the far end, her traveling dress replaced by a simpler work dress, her hair still neatly arranged despite the day's journey. She looked up as Caleb entered and something passed between them, acknowledgement, understanding, a connection neither had asked for but couldn't quite deny. "Mr. Vance," Mrs. Chen said, appearing from the kitchen. "Sit there, near Miss Hart. She knows nobody here yet. You keep her company." It wasn't a suggestion. Caleb sat, acutely aware of Eliza beside him. The other residents made polite small talk, questions about the journey, curiosity about Eliza's plans, complaints about the garrison's increasing control of the town. Mrs. Chen served a surprisingly good meal of rice, vegetables, and some kind of spiced meat that Caleb couldn't identify but tasted better than anything he'd eaten in months. "Mrs. Chen," Eliza said during a lull in conversation, "do you know if there are children in town who would benefit from schooling?" "Many children, 20, maybe 30. They help parents at claims during day, run wild at night. Parents too tired or too greedy to teach them properly." Mrs. Chen's expression turned sad. "My own grandson is here with his father, 10 years old, cannot read. I teach him what I can, but I am busy with boarding house." "Would parents send their children to school if one existed?" "Some would. Others," Mrs. Chen shrugged. "Silver fever makes people forget what matters. But enough would come, enough to justify school." Eliza nodded, her mind clearly working through logistics. "And where might I find a suitable building? I don't need much, just a room large enough for desks and a chalkboard." One of the older miners spoke up. "Old company office near the North Claims is empty. Building's sound, just needs cleaning. Nobody's using it since the garrisons took over those operations." "The garrisons own it?" Eliza asked. "Own or control, same difference these days." The miner's voice carried bitterness. "But that building's been sitting empty for months. Can't see how they'd notice or care if someone cleaned it up and used it." "Actually, they would care," Caleb said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. "The garrison see education as a threat. Educated miners ask questions about claim rights, about fair compensation, about legal ownership. They won't want a school operating in a building they control." "Then I'll ask their permission," Eliza said calmly. "That's a terrible idea." "Why? If they own the building, courtesy suggests I should request use of it before simply taking over. Perhaps we can reach an agreement." Caleb stared at her. "Miss Hart, the Garrison brothers don't negotiate. They intimidate. They threaten. They hurt people who challenge their authority. Walking into their office and asking permission is like walking into a wolf's den and asking politely to borrow a tooth. Do you have a better suggestion?" He didn't, which made the whole situation more frustrating. Eliza needed a building. The most suitable building was controlled by men who'd see her school as a threat. There was no good solution, only varying degrees of bad options. "At least let me come with you," Caleb heard himself say, "when you talk to them. Someone should be there who knows how these men operate." Eliza's expression softened. "You're supposed to leave at dawn." "I can delay a day." The words came out before he'd fully decided, but once spoken, he realized they were true. One more day won't matter to the stage company, but it might matter to you. "Why are you doing this?" Eliza asked quietly, the other conversation at the table flowing around them. "You've made it very clear you don't want to care about anything or anyone, so why help me?" It was a fair question. Caleb didn't have a good answer, at least not one he was ready to admit out loud. "Because you remind me that some things are worth fighting for," he finally said, "even if I've forgotten how to fight for anything except survival." "You haven't forgotten. You just convinced yourself you had." She held his gaze. "But I've watched you for 3 days, Caleb. You protected everyone on that coach. Not because it was your job, but because you still care. You're still in there, under all that armor you've built. You're just afraid of what happens if you let yourself feel again. Maybe I have good reason to be afraid. Maybe. Or maybe you've been afraid so long you've forgotten what it's like to be alive." She said it gently, without judgment. "Thank you for offering to come with me tomorrow. I accept. Not because I need protection, though I appreciate it, but because I think you need to see that building something matters. That taking a risk for something good is worth doing, even when you're scared." Caleb wanted to argue that he wasn't scared, just practical. But lying to Eliza felt pointless. She saw through him too clearly. "Morning then," he said. 8 o'clock. We'll go talk to the garrisons." "It's a date." She smiled slightly. "Well, not a date. An appointment.
A professional meeting. I understood what you meant. But the word hung between them anyway, date, and neither of them seemed quite sure how to navigate around it. The rest of dinner passed in companionable conversation. Caleb found himself relaxing despite the situation, drawn into discussions about the town's problems and potential solutions. The other residents clearly respected Mrs. Chen and seemed to see Eliza's school plan as a glimmer of hope in an otherwise deteriorating situation. After the meal, Caleb walked Eliza to her room, a small but clean space on the second floor with a window overlooking the street. "Thank you for dinner," she said, pausing at her door, "and for staying tomorrow. I know it costs you to delay your schedule. The company will understand. They know what Redemption Falls is like." "I don't mean the professional cost. I mean the personal one." She studied his face in the lamplight. "Every day you stay here, every connection you make, makes it harder to maintain that wall you've built. Makes it harder to stay numb. That's what you're really afraid of." He couldn't deny it. What if I'm right? What if caring just leads to more loss? Then you'll hurt again. But you'll also live again. Really live. Not just exist. She reached out and briefly touched his arm. "I think Sarah would want that for you. I think your daughters would want that for you. The question is whether you want it for yourself." Before he could respond, she slipped into her room and closed the door, leaving Caleb standing in the hallway with thoughts he couldn't quiet and feelings he couldn't suppress. He left the boarding house and walked through Redemption Falls' dark streets, his mind churning. The town was loud even at night, saloons blazing with light and noise, miners drinking away their exhaustion or celebrating their fines, violence simmering just beneath the surface of every interaction. This was the world Eliza wanted to change, one school and one child at a time. It seemed impossible, naive, doomed to fail. But Sarah had believed in impossible things too, had insisted on planting flowers in harsh soil, had fought for beauty and meaning in a place that offered neither. And for a while she'd succeeded. For 6 years they'd had something worth having. A family, a home, a life that mattered, until the fire took it all away. But what if Eliza was right? What if the temporary nature of happiness didn't invalidate its value? What if 6 years of meaning was worth the pain of loss? Caleb found himself at the edge of town, staring out at the dark hills where silver waited to be torn from the earth. Men came here chasing fortune, willing to risk everything for the chance at wealth. Most failed. Many died. But they kept coming anyway, driven by hope or desperation or the fundamental human need to believe that struggle could lead to something better. Maybe that's what Eliza was doing, chasing something more valuable than silver, building something that might outlast her own life. Maybe that's what he should be doing too. He stood there for a long time, wrestling with ghosts and possibilities, until the cold night air drove him back toward the depot, where Tommy had arranged a bunk for him in the company barracks. Tomorrow, he'd face the Garrison brothers. Tomorrow, he'd step into conflict he'd been avoiding for 5 years. Tomorrow, he'd choose between the safety of numbness and the risk of caring again. But tonight, for the first time since the fire, Caleb let himself imagine a future that might be worth living. A purpose beyond survival. A reason to fight instead of just enduring. It terrified him. It also felt like the first honest thing he'd allowed himself to feel in 5 long years. Morning came with gunfire. Caleb jerked awake, his hand instinctively reaching for the Colt beside his bunk. 3 shots, rapid succession, somewhere in the center of town. Then shouting. Then silence more ominous than the gunfire itself. He dressed quickly and headed into the street, joining the crowd converging on the source of the disturbance. Tommy caught up with him, breathless. "It's the marshal's office," the young guard panted. "Someone shot it up last night. Garrett's alive, but—" Caleb was already running. The marshal's office looked like it had been attacked by a small army. The windows were shattered, bullet holes pocked the wooden walls, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, James Garrett sat at his bullet-riddled desk, calmly documenting the damage while blood seeped from a bandage on his left arm. "They sent a message," Garrett said as Caleb entered. 20 men, middle of the night, fired maybe 200 rounds into this building. Miracle I wasn't killed. Or maybe not a miracle, I think they wanted me alive to deliver their response. Response to what? To Morrison's letter, to the idea of federal deputies coming here.
Garrett's jaw was tight with controlled anger. The garrison sent their lieutenant, a man named Pike. He stood outside and shouted the terms while his men reloaded. They said any federal officer who sets foot in Redemption Falls dies. Any civilian who helps federal officers dies. Any business that shelters federal officers gets burned. And you? They're allowing me to leave. 1 hour to pack and a ride out. If I'm still here at noon, they'll come back and finish the job. Garrett met Caleb's eyes. They're not bluffing. I've seen what they do to people who challenge them. So you're leaving? I have to. Staying accomplishes nothing except getting killed. But I'll be back with those deputies and enough men to take these bastards down. He stood, wincing from his wounded arm. In the meantime, this town has no law. The garrison's won. For now. Caleb felt cold fury building in his chest, not just at the garrison's violence, but at the casual way they destroyed the fragile hope of justice. Men like Garrett were rare. Losing him meant losing the only legitimate authority standing between Redemption Falls and complete chaos. What about the people here? Caleb asked. The ones who can't leave. They survive however they can, same as always. Garrett started gathering his belongings, moving with the efficiency of a man who'd evacuated under threat before. I'm sorry, Caleb. I know you wanted better for this place. For that schoolteacher. Eliza. The thought hit like a physical blow. If the garrisons were bold enough to run off a federal deputy, what would they do to a woman trying to start a school? Caleb left the marshal's office at a run, Tommy struggling to keep pace. The boarding house seemed quiet as they approached. No signs of disturbance. But the tension in the air was palpable. People watching from windows, conversations conducted in urgent whispers, the whole town holding its breath. Mrs. Chen met him at the door, her face grave. The shooting woke everyone. Miss Hart wants to go ahead with her plan to speak with the garrisons. I tell her this is bad time, but she does not listen. Where is she? In her room, preparing. Mrs. Chen grabbed his arm. Mr. Vance, you must stop her. Those men are dangerous now. They have shown their power. They will not tolerate challenges. I know. I'll talk to her. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with fear he'd convinced himself he could no longer feel. He knocked on Eliza's door harder than intended. She opened it immediately, already dressed for the day, her traveling bag packed. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp, alert. You heard, she said. Everyone heard. Eliza, you can't go through with this. Not today. Not after what they did to Garrett. Because they're violent? That's exactly why I need to proceed. Violence only wins when good people surrender. She moved to collect her hat. I'm going to speak with the garrisons as planned. I'm going to request use of that building, and I'm going to establish a school in this town. They'll kill you. Maybe. Or maybe they'll realize that killing a schoolteacher brings more scrutiny than letting her teach a few children. She turned to face him fully. Caleb, I understand you're afraid. For me, for yourself, for what might happen. But I can't let fear dictate my actions. If I do, everything I believe becomes meaningless. It's not fear. It's reality. The garrisons just demonstrated exactly what they do to challenges to their authority. They demonstrated what they do to armed authority figures representing federal law. I'm neither armed nor representing anyone except children who need education. Her voice was steady, rational. I'm betting they see a difference. I'm betting they won't want the attention that comes with harming a woman teacher. And if you're wrong, then you'll have been right, and I'll have been foolish. But I'd rather die trying than live knowing I surrendered without even attempting what I came here to do. Caleb stared at her, seeing Sarah in every word, every gesture, the same stubborn courage, the same refusal to be ruled by fear, the same determination to build something good in a harsh place. And he realized with devastating clarity that he couldn't let her walk into danger alone, couldn't just watch another strong woman die because he was too afraid to fight alongside her. Then I'm coming with you, he said. Not just to the meeting, all the way, however long it takes, whatever it costs. Eliza's expression shifted, surprise breaking through her composure. Caleb, you don't have to. Yes, I do, because you're right. About all of it. About me hiding behind numbness. About survival not being enough. About needing to fight for things that matter. He stepped closer.
I've been dead for 5 years. Maybe it's time I tried living again, even if it scares me,
Even if I might lose again. You might, she said softly. That's the risk of caring. I know, but the alternative is what I've been doing, existing without purpose, surviving without meaning, and I'm done with that. He held her gaze. So if you're determined to do this, I'm standing with you, all the way.
For a moment, Eliza just looked at him, and in her eyes he saw recognition, gratitude, and something else. Something that felt like hope, or possibility, or the dangerous beginning of connection. Then she smiled, and it was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then let's go build a school, she said. They walked through Redemption Falls together, side by side, toward whatever waited at the Garrison Brothers' headquarters. Behind them, Tommy followed at a respectful distance, shotgun ready. Around them, the town watched, some with curiosity, others with fear, a few with something that might have been admiration. Caleb's hand rested on his Colt's grip, ready but not drawn. His heart hammered with fear and determination in equal measure. For the first time in 5 years, he was choosing to fight for something instead of just against his own continued existence. For the first time in 5 years, he felt truly alive. And if that meant risking pain again, risking loss again, risking his heart on a stubborn schoolteacher who saw beauty where others saw only violence, well, maybe that's what living actually required. Maybe that's what Sarah would have wanted for him. Maybe that's what he wanted for himself. The Garrison Brothers' office loomed ahead, and Caleb walked toward it with purpose instead of resignation, fear tempered by determination, ready to face whatever came next, because some things were worth fighting for. And Eliza Hart, stubborn, brave, impossible Eliza Hart, had reminded him what those things were. The Garrison Brothers' headquarters occupied the largest building in Redemption Falls, a 2-story structure that had once been a legitimate mining company office before violence and intimidation had transferred ownership. Armed men lounged outside, their rifles held with casual menace. They straightened as Caleb, Eliza, and Tommy approached, hands drifting toward weapons. "State your business," one of them said, a scarred man with cold eyes. "We're here to speak with the Garrisons," Eliza said calmly, before Caleb could respond. "Regarding use of one of their buildings." The guard's eyes raked over her with open contempt. "The Garrisons don't take meetings with schoolmarms. Move along." "Then perhaps you could ask them," Eliza continued, her voice pleasant but firm. "I've come a long way, and I'd hate to think the Garrison brothers are too afraid to speak with an unarmed woman about a simple business proposition." The guard's face darkened. "You got a mouth on you, lady." "She's got more than that," Caleb said quietly, stepping forward just enough to shift the dynamics. "And we're not leaving until someone with actual authority makes that decision. So either get Pike or one of the brothers, or stand here looking stupid while we wait." For a tense moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then the guard spat in the dust and jerked his head toward another man. "Get Pike. Tell him some fools want to see the bosses." They waited in hostile silence, surrounded by armed men who watched them with the predatory patience of wolves circling prey. Caleb's hand never left his Colt's grip. Tommy held the shotgun ready but not aimed, his earlier nervousness replaced by grim determination. Eliza stood between them, composed as if she were waiting for a church social rather than a meeting with violent men fresh from running off a federal marshal. Pike emerged from the building, the same lieutenant who delivered the Garrison's ultimatum to Garrett. He was tall and lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and filed down with cruelty. His eyes found Eliza first, then Caleb, recognition flickering. "The stage driver," Pike said. "Thought you'd be halfway to Fort Defiance by now. Change of plans." "Bad choice." Pike's attention returned to Eliza. "And you must be the schoolteacher everyone's talking about. Miss Hart, right? Word travels fast in a small town." "Then you know why I'm here," Eliza said. "I'd like to discuss using the empty company building near the North Claims as a school." Pike laughed, short, sharp, and utterly without humor. "A school? You want to start a school in Redemption Falls, today, after what happened last night?" "What happened last night is precisely why education matters. Violence thrives in ignorance. Education creates alternatives." Pretty words. Useless, but pretty. Pike moved closer, deliberately invading her space. Caleb tensed, but Eliza didn't flinch. "Let me explain something, Miss Hart. The Garrison brothers own this town.
Not legally, maybe, but in every way that matters. They decide who stays, who goes, who lives, who dies. And they don't take kindly to outsiders coming in and changing things. I'm not trying to change ownership structures or challenge authority, Eliza said evenly. I'm simply offering to educate children. Surely the garrisons can't object to minors' children learning to read and calculate. You'd think that. You'd be wrong. Pike's smile was predatory. See, educated people ask questions. Questions about claim rights, about fair wages, about whether contracts are legal. The garrisons prefer people who don't ask questions, people who work hard and keep their mouths shut and accept what they're told. So you admit you're cheating them. The words hung in the air like a thrown knife. Even Caleb winced at Eliza's directness. Pike's expression went flat and dangerous. You should be very careful what you accuse people of, lady. I'm not accusing, I'm observing. Eliza's voice remained calm, reasonable. If education threatens your business model, that suggests your business model depends on ignorance, which means you are, by definition, taking advantage of people who don't know better. That's not accusation, that's simple logic. Pike's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Caleb's Colt was halfway out of its holster before Pike even completed the movement, the weapon appearing in Caleb's hand with practiced speed. Around them, the other guards raised their rifles. Tommy swung the shotgun up, covering the nearest group. Time crystallized into that terrible moment before violence erupts. Everyone armed, everyone ready, everyone calculating whether they could kill before being killed. Enough! The voice came from the building's doorway. A man emerged, middle-aged and expensively dressed by frontier standards, with the kind of face that could shift between charm and cruelty with frightening ease. This was clearly one of the Garrison brothers. Caleb guessed it was Jack, the older and reportedly smarter of the two. Put the guns down, Jack said. All of you, right now. Pike stepped back reluctantly. Caleb lowered his weapon but didn't holster it. The tension dropped from imminent to merely dangerous. Now then, Jack said, approaching with measured steps. Miss Hart, is it? I'm Jack Garrison. Please excuse my men's rudeness. Tensions are high this morning after some unfortunate business last night. Unfortunate for the federal marshal you shot at, Eliza said. Jack's smile never wavered. A misunderstanding. Marshal Garrett is free to leave unharmed. We simply made it clear that Redemption Falls handles its own affairs. No federal interference needed. His eyes shifted to Caleb. And you're the stage driver who's caused so much interest. Vance, right? Word is you've got a reputation for surviving dangerous routes. I do my job. I'm sure. But your job was finished when you delivered your passengers. So why are you still here standing beside a schoolteacher making demands of me? It was a fair question, and Caleb found himself answering with more honesty than intended. Because she's right, about education, about giving people alternatives to violence, and because I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by bad ones while I stand aside and do nothing. Jack studied him with sharp intelligence. That sounds like a man choosing sides. Dangerous thing to do in a contested town. More dangerous to have no sides worth choosing. Philosophical. I respect that. Jack's attention returned to Eliza. Let's talk about your school, Miss Hart. Walk with me, just you and me. Your guard dogs can wait outside. Absolutely not, Caleb said immediately. It's fine, Eliza replied. Mr. Garrison wants to talk business. I can handle a business conversation. Eliza, trust me. She met his eyes, and in them he saw determination backed by intelligence. She had a plan, even if he couldn't see it yet. I'll be fine. Against every instinct, Caleb nodded. Eliza followed Jack Garrison into the building, leaving Caleb, Tommy, and a dozen armed men staring at each other in hostile silence. Pike lit a cigarette, his expression vicious. Your lady friend's got courage. Stupid, but courageous. Won't matter, though. Jack's going to explain reality to her. Then she'll leave on tomorrow's stage, and Redemption Falls stays exactly as it is. You seem very confident about that. I am. Because Jack's smart. He'll offer her money to leave or threaten her if money doesn't work, or make it very clear what happens to people who challenge the Garrison brothers. One way or another, she leaves. And if she doesn't? Pike's smile was cold. Then she joins the list of people who learned too late that we're not bluffing. Inside the building, Eliza followed Jack Garrison through a well-appointed office to a private room furnished with expensive chairs
and a polished desk that seemed absurdly civilized in this rough mining town. Jack poured 2 glasses of whiskey and offered one to Eliza. "I don't drink," she said. "Smart. Whiskey's made more fortunes disappear than gambling and women combined." He sat behind the desk, sipping his own glass. "So let's talk honestly, Miss Hart. You seem like an intelligent woman, too intelligent to not understand what you're walking into. I understand that Redemption Falls needs a school and you control the building that would work best. I control everything in Redemption Falls. The question is why you think I'd let you disrupt that control." Jack leaned forward. "Education is noble. I'm not against it in principle, but in practice, it's a threat to the system I've built here. Educated miners are difficult miners. They organize, they negotiate, they write letters to newspapers and federal authorities. They become problems. So you prefer them ignorant and exploitable. I prefer them productive and profitable. There's a difference." Jack's tone remained pleasant, conversational. "I took over failing claims, brought in capital, created jobs. These men make more working for me than they ever did independently. Yes, I take the majority of the profit. But without my investment and organization, there'd be no profit at all. I'm not a villain, Miss Hart. I'm a businessman. A businessman who runs off federal marshals with gunfire. A businessman who protects his investments from outside interference." Jack set down his glass. "But we're getting off topic. Let me make you an offer. I'll give you $500, a year's teaching salary in any established city, to leave on tomorrow's stage. Take it, find a safer place to build your school, and everyone walks away happy." "I'm not leaving." "I'm offering you a fortune to do nothing except go somewhere else. Why would you refuse?" "Because I came here to make a difference. Because these children deserve education. Because civilization doesn't happen by accident. It requires people willing to fight for it." Eliza leaned forward. "And because you're not as confident as you pretend. If you were, you wouldn't bother offering money. You'd just threaten me and be done with it." Jack's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "You're perceptive. Fine. Here's the truth. Killing you would be easy. Making you disappear would be easy. But it would also bring attention I don't need right now. Federal marshals are already suspicious. A dead schoolteacher would give them the excuse they need to send soldiers, not deputies. So yes, I prefer to solve this problem with money rather than violence. Then we have something in common. I also prefer peaceful solutions." Eliza kept her voice calm, reasonable. "So here's my counteroffer. Let me use that empty building. I'll teach reading, writing, arithmetic, nothing political, nothing that threatens your business operations. In exchange, I'll stay completely neutral in any disputes between miners and management. I won't organize, won't agitate, won't cause problems. Just education. And I'm supposed to believe you'll stay neutral? You're supposed to recognize that having a neutral party in town benefits you. Right now, you rule through fear, but fear creates resentment, and resentment eventually explodes. Give people something positive, education for their children, and you reduce that pressure. You become the man who allows schools, not just the man who shoots marshals. That's good business." Jack studied her with genuine interest now. "You've thought this through." "I've spent 3 days on a stagecoach with time to think, and I've spent my life in places where powerful men controlled everything. I know how to navigate those situations. By offering them something they want, by showing them that what I want isn't actually threatening to what they want. You want a profitable, stable mining operation. I want educated children. Those goals aren't mutually exclusive." Jack stood and walked to the window, looking out at his domain. "You're right about one thing. I don't want federal attention, and a schoolteacher disappearing would bring exactly that." He turned back. "Fine. You can have the building, but there are conditions." "I'm listening." "First, you teach reading and arithmetic, nothing else. No talk about workers' rights or fair wages or legal claim procedures, pure academics." "Agreed." "Second, you stay out of all disputes between my men and the miners. Complete neutrality, like you said. You don't testify if there's ever an investigation. You don't write letters to newspapers. You don't make problems." "Agreed." "Third, and most important, if you break these conditions, if you become a problem, there won't be warnings or second chances. You'll simply disappear. And your stage driver friend with the hero complex won't be able to stop it." Jack's voice hardened.
Do we understand each other? Eliza met his gaze without flinching. Perfectly. You're allowing the school because it serves your interests. I'm accepting your conditions because they allow me to accomplish my goal. This is a business arrangement, not a friendship. Good. Then we have a deal. Jack extended his hand. Eliza shook it, sealing an alliance with the devil that might save children's futures or cost her everything. She couldn't tell which yet. Outside, Caleb was pacing like a caged animal, his imagination creating 1,000 terrible scenarios. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. Tommy tried making conversation but eventually gave up, recognizing that Caleb's anxiety was beyond the reach of words. When Eliza finally emerged, alive and apparently unharmed, Caleb felt something in his chest unclench. "We have an agreement," she announced calmly. "The Garrisons are allowing me to use the building." Pike's expression went from smug to shocked. Even Jack's guards exchanged surprised glances. Clearly, they'd expected a different outcome. Jack appeared behind Eliza, his face unreadable. "Miss Hart will operate her school under certain conditions. My men will deliver keys to the building this afternoon. Anyone who interferes with her work answers to me. Understood?" The guards nodded, though none looked happy about it. Caleb studied Eliza, trying to read what had happened inside. She gave him the slightest nod. "Trust me," it said. "Later." "Then we're done here," Caleb said. "Come on." They walked away from the garrison headquarters in tense silence, surrounded by hostile stares. Only when they were several blocks away did Caleb finally speak. "What did you agree to?" "To teach reading and arithmetic and stay out of everything else. To remain neutral in disputes. To accept that if I become a problem, I'll be eliminated." Eliza's voice was matter-of-fact. "In exchange, I get the building and Jack Garrison's protection for the school itself." "That's a deal with the devil." "Yes, but it's the deal that gets children educated." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "I know it's not perfect. I know I'm compromising with people who deserve to be in prison, but perfect doesn't exist out here. Only possible versus impossible. And this makes the school possible." Caleb wanted to argue, to tell her she'd traded too much, that collaborating with men like the Garrisons was wrong regardless of the outcome. But he looked at her face, determined, clear-eyed, accepting of the moral complexity, and realized she'd already wrestled with these questions and made her choice, just like he'd wrestled with his own questions and chosen to stand beside her. "All right," he said, "then we build a school. But I'm staying, not just for a day, for however long this takes, because I don't trust the Garrisons to keep their word, and someone needs to watch your back." "Caleb, you have a job, a life. You can't just—" "My job is driving stages on routes I don't care about between places that don't matter. That's not a life. That's existence. This—" He gestured at the rough town around them. "This might actually mean something. So yes, I'm staying. We'll figure out the details, but I'm not leaving you to face this alone." Something profound passed between them in that moment. Understanding, connection, the unspoken acknowledgement that their fates had become intertwined. Eliza's eyes glistened with emotion she was clearly trying to control. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing this matters. For believing I'm not just a foolish woman with impossible dreams." "You are a foolish woman with impossible dreams," Caleb said, but his tone was gentle. "You're also brave and smart and stubborn enough to make impossible things happen. Someone should be here to witness it. Or to pick up the pieces when it falls apart. That too." Tommy cleared his throat awkwardly. "So, what do I tell the company about the stage?" "Tell them I'm taking a leave of absence. Personal reasons." Caleb's mind was already working through logistics. "Take the coach back yourself. You're ready. Tell Henderson what's happening here. Garrett being run off, the situation with the Garrisons, all of it. Maybe it'll get federal attention faster." "You sure, boss?" "I'm sure. You can handle the return trip. Just watch yourself in the Narrows." Tommy nodded, though he looked uncertain about the new responsibility, but he was a good kid. He'd manage. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Jack Garrison kept his word. Keys to the empty building arrived by mid-afternoon, delivered by a sullen guard who made it clear he didn't approve but followed orders. The building itself was dusty and neglected but structurally sound, with enough space for desks and a teaching area. Word spread quickly through Redemption Falls.
By evening, several miners had stopped by to ask questions. Some were skeptical, others hostile, but a few, particularly those with children, showed genuine interest. Mrs. Chen brought her grandson to meet Eliza, the 10-year-old boy staring with wide eyes at the woman who might teach him to read. "When does school start?" the boy asked. "Soon," Eliza promised. "Very soon." Caleb spent his time assessing security, which windows were vulnerable, which doors needed reinforcing, what sightlines existed for potential threats. He also visited every shopkeeper and business owner who seemed reasonable, quietly spreading word that the school had Jack Garrison's approval and anyone interfering would answer to the Garrisons. It wasn't protection he'd have chosen, but it was the protection available. By nightfall, exhaustion had settled into his bones. Not the empty exhaustion of his last 5 years, but the good tired that came from working towards something meaningful. He and Eliza stood in the clean school building, lamplight casting long shadows across the empty space that would soon hold desks and children and possibility. "It's real," Eliza said softly. "We actually did it. You did it. I just provided backup. You provided more than that. You gave me courage to walk into that office. You gave me a reason to believe this could work." She turned to face him. "Why, Caleb? Why stay? Why risk everything for a school in a town you don't even like?" He'd been asking himself the same question all day. The answer came easier than expected. "Because for 5 years, I've been waiting to die. Going through motions, driving dangerous routes, hoping something would finally finish what the fire started. But you made me remember what I'd forgotten, that survival isn't enough, that life requires purpose, that meaning matters more than safety." He paused, choosing words carefully. "Sarah used to say that the only way to honor the dead is to keep living fully, to build things they'd be proud of. I stopped doing that when I lost her. Maybe it's time I started again." Eliza stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "You're doing this for Sarah?" "I'm doing it for myself. Sarah just showed me how, back when she was alive. You reminded me what she taught me." He held her gaze. "You remind me of her in a lot of ways, the strength, the refusal to quit, the ability to see beauty and possibility where others see only hardship." "I'm not her, Caleb. I know. You're your own person with your own strengths and your own losses. But that doesn't mean I can't learn from you the way I learned from her. It doesn't mean I can't choose to fight for something again because you showed me it's possible." "And if we fail? If the Garrisons turn on us or the school closes or something goes wrong? Then we fail. But we'll fail trying, which is better than the slow death I've been living." He reached out and gently took her hand, the first time he'd deliberately touched anyone with affection in 5 years. "I can't promise you success. Can't promise safety. Can't even promise I won't be difficult and broken and frustrating to work with. But I can promise I'll stand beside you, however long it takes. Whatever it costs." Eliza's fingers tightened around his. "That's all anyone can promise. And it's enough." They stood there in the lamplight, two damaged people who'd found purpose in each other's stubborn courage, while outside Redemption Falls settled into its violent, restless night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new tests of their fragile alliance with the Garrison brothers. But tonight, in this empty building that represented hope and possibility, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since the fire destroyed his family. He felt alive, really, truly alive. And for the first time in 5 years, that didn't terrify him. It felt like coming home. The next weeks blurred into a rhythm of constant work and cautious hope. Eliza taught during the days while Caleb handled security and logistics, securing desks donated by miners, grateful for education, negotiating with suppliers for books and slates, quietly discouraging trouble before it started. Children came slowly at first, then in growing numbers as parents realized the school was legitimate and protected. Mrs. Chen's grandson learned to read his first words. A miner's daughter mastered arithmetic well enough to help her father calculate proper shares of a claim. 2 young boys who'd been heading toward lives of violence and crime found purpose in education. Small victories, fragile progress, but progress nonetheless. Jack Garrison kept his distance but his word. His men didn't interfere. When a drunk miner tried to harass Eliza one evening, Garrison's enforcer Pike personally threw the man out of town with a warning that the school was off limits. It was protection bought with compromise, but it held. Caleb found himself settling into Redemption Falls in ways he'd never expected. He took a room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, 2 doors down from Eliza. He helped James Garrett, who'd returned quietly despite the garrison's threats, document their crimes from a safe distance. He became someone the town's decent people could turn to when problems arose. An unofficial deputy without a badge, but with enough reputation to make men think twice. And slowly, carefully, he and Eliza grew closer. Not romantically, not yet, but with the deep connection of 2 people who'd chosen to fight the same battles. They talked long into the nights about philosophy and loss and hope. They shared meals at Mrs. Chen's table. They built something together that neither could have built alone. One evening, 6 weeks after the school opened, Caleb found Eliza on the building's front steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. 12 students now, she said as he sat beside her. 12 children who can read, who can calculate, who have futures beyond just surviving. That's 12 more than existed 6 weeks ago. Is it enough, though? 12 students in a town of thousands. A fragile school held together by a bargain with criminals. A single teacher and an aging stage driver pretending we can change anything. Aging? Caleb raised an eyebrow. That pulled a smile from her. You're not old. You're weathered, distinguished, very frontier heroic. I'm 34 and feeling every day of it. Then we're both weathered, but still here, still fighting. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture so natural he barely noticed it happening. Thank you for staying, for making this possible. We made it possible, together. They sat in comfortable silence while the sun dropped below the mountains and Redemption Falls' lights began flickering on. Somewhere in town, a saloon piano started playing. Dogs barked. Life continued in all its messy, violent, beautiful complexity. And Caleb realized something profound. He was happy. Not the desperate happiness of his early years with Sarah, when everything was new and untested, but the deeper happiness of knowing he was doing something meaningful with someone who understood both his damage and his determination. He was building again, creating something that mattered, honoring the dead by choosing to live fully. Sarah would have approved. Emma and Caroline would have been proud. And for the first time since the fire, that thought didn't break him. It strengthened him. Eliza, he said quietly. She lifted her head to look at him. Yes? I think I'm falling in love with you. The words surprised them both. Eliza's eyes widened, her breath catching. For a long moment, she just stared at him, processing. That terrifies you, she finally said. Completely. Because I know what it costs to love someone, know what it feels like to lose them, know that every day with you is a day that might end in loss. He held her gaze. But I'm done running from fear, done letting the possibility of pain stop me from living. So yes, I'm terrified. And yes, I'm falling in love with you anyway. Eliza's hand found his. I'm terrified too. Because I lost Thomas, and I swore I'd never let anyone that close again. Never risk that kind of pain again. But somehow you've broken through every defense I built, and now I'm here, falling for a broken stage driver with a hero complex and a death wish he's finally overcoming. Sounds complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. She leaned closer. I don't know if this is smart. Don't know if we're ready. Don't know if we'll survive what's coming, but I know I want to try. Then let's try. He kissed her there on the steps of the school they'd built together, while Redemption Falls roared around them, and the future remained uncertain and dangerous. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and careful, 2 damaged people learning how to be vulnerable again. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of choosing hope over fear, connection over isolation, life over mere survival. We're going to be okay, Eliza whispered. Yeah, Caleb agreed. I think we are. And in that moment, despite everything, despite the Garrison brothers' threats, despite the fragile nature of their compromise, despite the 100 ways this could all fall apart, Caleb believed it. They were going to be okay. Not because the world had become safe, not because the future was guaranteed, but because they'd chosen to face it together, to build something meaningful despite the risks, to love despite knowing love could be lost. That was enough. That was everything. The trouble came 3 months after that kiss, on a cold November morning when frost clung to the wooden buildings and breath-formed clouds in the thin mountain air. Caleb was walking toward the school when he noticed the crowd gathered outside. Miners, shopkeepers, even some of Garrison's men, all staring at something on the school's door. He pushed through to find a notice nailed to the wood, official-looking paper with territorial seal and formal language. His stomach dropped as he read. By order of the Territorial Mining Commission, all buildings on surveyed company land revert to primary claim holders, pending resolution of disputed ownership. Occupants must vacate within 7 days. Failure to comply will result in forcible removal and prosecution for trespassing. Eliza appeared beside him, her face pale as she read over his shoulder. They're taking the building back. The Garrisons are behind this, Caleb said, his voice tight with anger. This is them breaking the deal. Or it's the Mining Commission legitimately resolving disputed claims. She touched the paper with shaking fingers. Either way, we lose the school. The crowd muttered around them, some sympathetic, others already calculating how this shift in power might affect their own situations. In Redemption Falls, loyalty was always provisional, always dependent on who held the upper hand. Mrs. Chen pushed through the crowd, her grandson clutching her hand. Miss Hart, this is wrong. The children need the school. Where will they learn? I don't know yet, Eliza said, struggling to keep her voice steady. But we'll figure something out. I promise. But the promise sounded hollow even to Caleb's ears. They'd built everything on the foundation of that single building, on the fragile compromise with the Garrisons. Take away the building, and the compromise meant nothing. Come on, Caleb said quietly, taking Eliza's arm. Let's talk to Garrett. Maybe he knows something. They found the deputy marshal in his rebuilt office, the morning light streaming through new windows that replaced the one shattered by bullets 3 months ago. Garrett looked up from his paperwork, his expression grim. You've seen the notice, he said. It wasn't a question. We have. Is it legitimate? It's real. The Mining Commission issued it, though I'd bet my badge the Garrisons pushed for it behind the scenes. Garrett stood, moving to a wall map covered with property markers. See, when the Silver Strike happened, there was confusion about who owned what. The Garrisons used that confusion to grab claims through intimidation and dubious purchases. But some of those claims are now under official review. That building sits on one of the disputed parcels. So the commission is taking it back? They're freezing all activity on disputed land until ownership is resolved, which could take months or years. Garrett's jaw tightened. Convenient timing, isn't it? Right when your school was starting to make a real difference. Eliza sank into a chair, the defeat visible in her shoulders. So that's it. We lose everything we built because of legal technicalities and men who see education as a threat. Not everything, Caleb said, his mind already working. We lose the building. We don't lose the purpose. Where else can we teach? Every structure in town is owned by someone, controlled by someone. The Garrisons will just block us again. Then we build our own. The idea crystallized as he spoke it. On land that can't be disputed. Land that's ours. Garrett looked at him with dawning understanding. You'd need to file a claim, stake out property. That takes money, time, and a willingness to defend it. I have money saved from 5 years of dangerous routes and hazard pay. Caleb had never spent his earnings, hadn't needed to, hadn't wanted anything enough to bother. But now he had a purpose for it, and I know how to defend property. The question is whether there's unclaimed land near town worth having. There is. Garrett moved to the map, pointing to an area south of the main settlement. Here, quarter section near Willow Creek. Good water, defensible position, close enough to town for access, but far enough that the Garrisons don't control it directly. Nobody's claimed it because it's not good for mining. The silver veins don't run that direction. But for a school, a house, maybe a small community? Perfect. Eliza stood slowly, hope reigniting in her eyes. We could build a real school. Not just use someone else's building, but create something permanent. Something they can't take away. It won't be easy, Caleb warned. We'd need lumber, labor, time. And the Garrisons won't like us establishing independent property right under their noses. They'll see it as a challenge. Let them. Eliza's voice had steel in it now, the same steel that had talked down bandits and negotiated with criminals. I'm done compromising with men who see children's futures as threats. If we have to build from nothing, we build from nothing. At least it'll be ours. Garrett grinned. I can help. My authority extends to protecting legitimate claims and settlers. If you file properly and start building, I can make sure it's legal. Won't stop the garrisons from causing trouble, but it'll make it harder for them to claim you're breaking laws. Then let's do it. Caleb felt the old determination rising, not the desperate death-seeking of his empty years, but the purposeful drive he'd thought died with Sarah. Today. We file the claim today and start building tomorrow. They spent the morning at the Territorial Claims Office, navigating bureaucracy and fees. By afternoon, Caleb owned a quarter section of frontier land, 160 acres of creek bottom and prairie grass that would never yield silver, but could yield something more valuable. A future. Word spread through Redemption Falls with the speed of wildfire. By evening, the lines were drawn. Some miners pledged to help with construction, grateful for what the school had given their children. Others, particularly those in Garrison's pocket, made it clear they'd stand with power over principle. The town, already divided, split further. Jack Garrison himself appeared at Mrs. Chen's boarding house just after sunset, flanked by Pike and 2 armed men. Mrs. Chen tried to block the doorway, but Garrison's cold smile made it clear he'd enter regardless. "I need to speak with Miss Hart and Mr. Vance," he said pleasantly. "Business matters." They met in the boarding house parlor, the tension thick enough to cut. Garrison settled into a chair like he owned the place, his men standing guard at the door. "You're making a mistake," Garrison said without preamble. "This claim you filed, this idea of building your own school, it's going to cause problems." "The only problem is that you broke our agreement," Eliza replied. "You promised the building in exchange for my neutrality. That commission notice wasn't coincidence." "True, but circumstances changed. The federal deputies arrived last week. Garrett didn't tell you? 4 marshals asking questions, investigating claims. I needed to demonstrate legitimate business operations, which meant resolving property disputes through proper channels." Garrison's smile was thin. "Unfortunate that your school was caught in that process. But business is business. So you sacrificed us to protect yourself." "I made the smart play, which is what I've always done." Garrison leaned forward. "But I'm not unreasonable. Here's a new offer. Abandon this claim. Leave Redemption Falls. I'll give you $2,000, enough to start a school somewhere else, somewhere safer, clean break, no hard feelings." "No." Eliza didn't hesitate. "You're sure? Because if you stay, if you build on that claim, you become a symbol, a challenge to my authority, and I can't allow challenges to stand. Then you'll have to remove us by force, which will give those federal deputies exactly the kind of evidence they're looking for." Caleb's voice was calm but hard. "We're done compromising with you, Garrison, done playing by your rules. We're building a school on our land, teaching whoever wants to learn, and there's not a damn thing you can legally do to stop us." Garrison's pleasant facade cracked, showing the predator beneath. "Legally. There's a lot that can happen that isn't technically illegal. Accidents, fires, people getting hurt in ways that can't be traced back to anyone specific." "Are you threatening us?" Eliza asked. "I'm explaining consequences. You want to play pioneer and build your little school? Fine. But don't expect me to protect you anymore. Don't expect anyone to come running when trouble finds you. You'll be on your own out there." He stood, straightening his expensive coat. "Last chance. Take the money and leave." "We're staying," Caleb said. Garrison studied them both, then shrugged. "Your funeral. Literally. Probably." He walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing. Those federal deputies? They're investigating me, but they're also investigating claim jumping, illegal seizures, property theft. If they find evidence that someone filed a false claim to steal land from legitimate owners, say, by claiming supposedly empty land that someone else has prior rights to, well, that's prison time. Just something to keep in mind." He left, his men following, leaving behind a threat that hung in the air like smoke. "He's going to challenge our claim," Eliza said quietly. "Produce false documents showing prior ownership. Tie us up in legal battles until we run out of money or patience." "Probably, but Garrett said that land has been vacant for 2 years. Any prior claim would have to be pretty well fabricated." Caleb moved to the window, watching Garrison's group disappear into the darkness. "The real threat isn't legal, it's physical. Garrison's right that we'll be exposed out there. If he sends men in the night, there's only so much we can defend against. Then we make sure we're not alone. We build fast, build strong, and build with enough people that attacking us means attacking a community, not just two individuals. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, it's terrifying, but it's what we have to do. She joined him at the window. Unless you want to take his money and leave, I would understand if... Stop. Caleb turned to face her. I'm not leaving. Not now. Not ever. We're doing this together. All the way. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and he held her close, both of them drawing strength from the connection they'd built. When they finally pulled apart, her eyes were wet but determined. Then let's build something they can't destroy, she said. The next morning, they rode out to the claim with Garrett and a dozen miners who'd volunteered to help. The land was beautiful in the cold sunlight, Willow Creek running clear and cold through a valley lined with cottonwood trees, prairie grass brown with approaching winter, mountains rising in the distance. It was raw and empty and perfect. There, Caleb said, pointing to a rise above the creek. We build the school there. High ground, good drainage, view of the whole valley. Anyone approaching, we'll see them coming. Thinking like a soldier, Garrett observed. Thinking like someone who knows what's coming. Caleb had fought in enough tight situations to understand tactics. We put up the school first, fastest, then living quarters, storage, eventually more buildings as people come. Make it a real settlement, not just one building. You're talking about founding a town, Eliza said. I'm talking about creating something permanent, something worth defending. He looked at the gathered miners. Anyone who helps build gets their children educated free. Anyone who settles here gets a vote in how we run things. No single owner, no Garrison brothers controlling everything. A real community. One of the miners, a grizzled man named Coleman, spat thoughtfully. That's ambitious. Also likely to get you killed. Garrison don't like competition. Then he can try to stop us, but we're not backing down. Coleman grinned. Hell, I'm in. Been wanting to punch Garrison in the face for 2 years. This might be close enough. The others agreed, and work began. They marked out the school's foundation, started cutting lumber from the surrounding forest, set up a temporary camp. It was hard physical labor that left everyone exhausted by nightfall. But it was also exhilarating, building something from nothing, creating hope through sheer determination and sweat. 3 days into construction, the first trouble came. A group of riders appeared on the ridge, Garrison's men, watching. Not approaching, not threatening directly, just present. A reminder that they were being monitored. Let them watch, Caleb said when one of the miners suggested chasing them off. We're not doing anything illegal. Let them report back that we're serious. But the watchers made everyone nervous. Men worked with rifles close at hand. Guard shifts were established for the nights. The joyful energy of the first days gave way to tense awareness that they were building under threat. The second incident was less subtle. Someone set fire to their lumber pile one night, destroying a week's worth of cut boards. They had no proof it was Garrison's men, but nobody doubted it. The message was clear. Building here would be expensive, slow, and dangerous. We need more help, Eliza said the next morning, surveying the damage. More people means more witnesses, more protection. Garrison's less likely to escalate if there's a crowd. Where do we get more people? Most of Redemption Falls is too scared to cross him. Then we look beyond Redemption Falls. She had that look again, the one that meant she'd had an idea. Fort Defiance, the settlers between here and there. The miners working independent claims who aren't under Garrison's control. We send word out that we're building a free settlement, that people are welcome, that there's safety in numbers. That could work, Garrett said. I can carry letters to Fort Defiance. Talk to Captain Morrison. If he spreads the word through official channels, we might get families willing to relocate. People looking for exactly what you're offering, a place to build without violence and intimidation. Do it, Caleb said. Fast before Garrison escalates further. Garrett rode out that afternoon. Meanwhile, construction continued despite the setback. More miners joined the effort, drawn by curiosity or conviction or simple dislike of the Garrisons. The school's frame rose slowly but steadily, raw lumber standing against the winter sky like a promise. Eliza taught lessons in the temporary camp while work continued, refusing to let education stop just because they'd lost their building. Children sat on logs and practiced letters in the dirt, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. It was primitive and difficult, but it was education nonetheless. And slowly, Caleb felt something shifting. The settlement was becoming real. What had started as defiance was transforming into actual community, people working together, protecting each other, building something larger than individual survival. It reminded him of his ranch, of the life he'd had with Sarah before the fire. But it was also different because this time he wasn't building alone. He had Eliza beside him, had Garrett and Mrs. Chen and dozens of others who'd chosen to stand for something good. 2 weeks after Garrett left, help arrived. Not soldiers or deputies, but something better, families. 3 wagons rolled into the valley carrying settlers who'd heard about the free settlement and decided to chance it. Then more came, and more. Within a month, 20 families had staked claims around the school, building homes and starting farms. The school itself was finished in early December, a solid structure with a stone foundation and thick walls. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and secure and theirs. Eliza taught the first lesson there with 30 children present, and Caleb stood at the back, watching her transform a room full of rough frontier kids into eager students. This was what they'd fought for. This moment right here. But the garrisons weren't finished. The real test came on a bitter cold night in January, when Pike led 20 armed men toward the settlement. They were spotted by guards half a mile out, giving just enough warning for the alarm to be raised. Caleb grabbed his rifle and joined the defensive line forming at the edge of the settlement. Beside him, Coleman and a dozen other miners took positions behind hastily built barricades. Behind them, women and children gathered in the school, the safest building with its stone foundation. Eliza appeared at his side, carrying one of the spare rifles. "Don't even think about telling me to hide," she said before he could speak. "Wasn't going to. But stay behind cover. These men shoot to kill." Pike's group stopped 50 yards out, just beyond easy rifle range. The lieutenant dismounted, hands clearly visible but close to his weapons. "We don't want trouble," he called out. "We're here on behalf of the Territorial Mining Commission. We have documentation showing prior claim to this land. You're squatting illegally." "Show us the documentation," Caleb called back. "It's on file with the commission. You're required to evacuate until the matter is legally resolved." "We filed a legitimate claim 2 months ago. We have witnesses, proper fees paid, everything documented. Whatever papers you're waiving are forgeries, and we both know it. That's for courts to decide. In the meantime, you're trespassing." Pike's voice hardened. "I'm giving you until dawn to clear out. Anyone still here after sunrise gets removed by force. Mr. Garrison is tired of your defiance." "Tell Mr. Garrison he's welcome to try removing us," Caleb replied. "But there are 20 families here now, all with legitimate stakes. Any violence against us will be witnessed by dozens of people and reported to federal authorities. He shoots one of us, he'll have territorial marshals and maybe army soldiers coming down on him." Empty threats. Garrett can't protect you. 4 federal deputies can't protect you. You're isolated out here, and Garrison's got 50 men who'll swear whatever he tells them to swear. Maybe. But we're not alone anymore. Caleb gestured behind him, where families stood watching from their homes. This isn't just 2 people he can make disappear. This is a community. An established settlement with children and schools and farms. Destroying that brings attention he doesn't want. Pike was silent for a long moment. Clearly, this wasn't the response he'd expected. The garrisons had gotten used to intimidation working, but communities were harder to intimidate than individuals. "Dawn," Pike finally said. "You have until dawn." They rode away, disappearing into the darkness. Caleb knew they wouldn't really leave, just circle back and wait for weakness. The garrisons had invested too much in controlling this territory to let a free settlement challenge their power. "They'll attack tonight," Coleman said quietly. "Probably try to burn the school, kill anyone who resists, scatter the families." "I know." Caleb's mind was racing through defensive options. "We need to be ready. Every able body on watch, rifles loaded, defensive positions reinforced. They come in darkness. We light them up. Make it costly enough that retreating looks smarter than pushing forward." The night stretched endlessly. Caleb positioned defenders at key points, made sure the school was protected, kept Eliza close despite her protests. The cold bit through their clothes, and the waiting was worse than actual fighting would have been. The attack came at 2 in the morning. Not Pike's group, but a different crew, men Caleb didn't recognize, probably hired guns brought in specifically for this. They approached silently from multiple directions, clearly planning to surround the settlement and set fires simultaneously. But the settlement had more guards than the attackers expected, and their approach wasn't as stealthy as they hoped. When the first torch was lit, Caleb's rifle barked, and the torchbearer went down screaming. All around the perimeter, defenders opened fire, and the night exploded into chaos. The attackers hadn't expected organized resistance. They thought they'd be burning out frightened families, not facing coordinated defense. The firefight was sharp and brutal, lasting maybe 5 minutes before the surviving attackers broke and ran, carrying their wounded and leaving 2 dead behind. "Everyone all right?" Caleb called out once the shooting stopped. Reports came back. A few minor wounds, 1 man shot in the shoulder but stable, nothing fatal. They'd actually held. Dawn came with no second attack. Instead, it brought James Garrett and a dozen territorial deputies, including the 4 federal marshals who'd been investigating the garrisons. They'd been watching from a distance, waiting to see if the garrisons would make a move that could be prosecuted. The attack on the settlement gave them everything they needed. "We've got the survivors in custody," Garrett reported. "They're already talking, trying to make deals. 2 of them directly implicate Jack Garrison in ordering the attack. Combined with everything else we've documented, the intimidation, the false claims, the assault on my office, we have enough to arrest the Garrison brothers and most of their organization." "What happens to Redemption Falls?" Eliza asked. "Territorial authority takes over until legitimate claim disputes are resolved and proper law is established. It'll be messy for a while, but the garrison's control is broken." Garrett smiled tiredly. "You did that. By refusing to back down, by building something they couldn't destroy, you gave us the proof we needed." The arrests happened that afternoon. Jack and his brother were taken in chains to Fort Defiance to await trial. Their men scattered, most fleeing the territory entirely. Redemption Falls descended into brief chaos, then began the slow process of reorganizing itself without the garrison's iron grip. The settlement, which people had started calling Hart's Creek after Eliza, continued to grow. More families arrived as word spread about free land and good schools. A general store opened, then a blacksmith, then a church for those who wanted it. What had started as Defiance became a genuine town. Caleb built a house near the school, a proper home with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and a front porch where you could watch the sun set over the mountains. He and Eliza were married in April, in the school they'd built together, with half the settlement attending. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he'd lost Sarah and his daughters, but it was a good life, built on purpose instead of despair. They had their first child the following winter, a daughter they named Hope, because that's what she represented. The chance to build new futures after loss, the possibility of joy after grief, the courage to love again despite knowing love could be lost. 2 years later, a son they named Thomas, after Eliza's first husband. Then another daughter, Sarah, named for the wife Caleb had lost. The school expanded to accommodate 40 students, then 60. Hart's Creek became known throughout the territory as a place where education mattered, where communities worked together, where law meant something more than who had the most guns. James Garrett eventually became territorial marshal, bringing legitimate law enforcement to the entire region. Mrs. Chen opened a second boarding house, then a restaurant. Coleman discovered that farming agreed with him better than mining and started the valley's first substantial farm. Families who'd come seeking silver found something more valuable: community, purpose, hope. And Caleb, who'd spent 5 years waiting to die, found himself thoroughly, completely alive. He still thought about Sarah, about Emma and Caroline, about the family he'd lost. But the pain no longer crushed him. Instead, it lived alongside his present happiness, a reminder that love was always worth the risk of loss. 10 years after that first stagecoach journey, Caleb stood on the porch of his home, watching his children play in the yard while Eliza graded papers inside. Hart's Creek spread out around them, a real town now, with hundreds of residents and all the institutions of civilization. The school had become a proper academy. The single building had become a full campus. "Papa, tell us the story," Hope said, running up to the porch with her brothers and sister. This had become their favorite request, the story of how the town began. "Which part?" Caleb asked, settling into his chair. "The part with the bandits, when Mama talked them out of robbing the stage." "That's not the best part," Thomas argued. "The best part is when Papa decided to stay and fight instead of running away."
No, the best part is when they built the school together, Sarah insisted.
Caleb smiled, looking at his children, named for the past and the future, for loss and hope, for everything that made life worth living. All those parts are important, he said, but the real story isn't about bandits or buildings. It's about choosing to live instead of just survive, about finding purpose after loss, about two broken people who learned that meaning matters more than safety. That's a boring story, Hope declared. Maybe, but it's a true one. He pulled his youngest daughter onto his lap. Your mother and I could have played it safe, could have run when things got hard, could have chosen comfort over courage. But we didn't. And because we didn't, this town exists. You exist. Hundreds of children have been educated. Families have found homes. That's what happens when people choose to fight for something good instead of surrendering to something bad. Tell it with the exciting parts, Thomas begged. So Caleb told the story again, the way his children liked to hear it, with dramatic reenactments of the ambush, with Eliza's brave confrontation with the garrisons, with the night battle that broke their power. He told it the way frontier stories were told, with enough truth to teach lessons and enough drama to hold attention. But inside, he thought about the real story, the one about grief and healing, about learning to live again after believing life was over, about a schoolteacher who saw through his defenses and a man who remembered how to fight for things that mattered. That was the story that counted. Not the violence or the drama, but the quiet courage of choosing hope over despair, connection over isolation, purpose over emptiness. Eliza joined them on the porch as the sun set, settling into the chair beside Caleb's. Their hands found each other automatically, fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. You're telling the story again, she observed. They insisted. They always insist, she smiled at their children. But it's a good story, worth repeating. Which version are we on tonight? The one where I'm the hero, or the one where you're the hero? The true version, where we're both broken people who fixed each other. That's the boring version, remember? Maybe to children. To adults who've lived through hardship, it's the most important version. She leaned her head on his shoulder. We did good, didn't we? Building this place, raising these children, creating something that lasts. We did better than good. We did what Sarah would have wanted, what Thomas would have wanted. We honored them by living fully. Caleb kissed the top of her head. Thank you for that, for teaching me how. You taught yourself. I just reminded you it was possible. They sat together while their children played and the town they'd built settled into evening. Lights appeared in windows. Families gathered for meals. The school stood solid and permanent against the darkening sky, a monument to stubborn courage and refusing to surrender to fear. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, but it was a lonely sound, not a threatening one. The wild frontier was still out there, still dangerous, still capable of taking everything. But here, in this valley, civilization had taken root. Community had formed. Hope had conquered despair. And Caleb Vance, who'd once been a dead man going through motions, was thoroughly, completely, impossibly alive. He'd survived the wilderness outside, but more importantly, he'd conquered the one inside himself. That was the real victory, the one that mattered, the one that would last long after the dramatic stories faded into legend. He was alive. He was loved. He had purpose. And in the end, that was everything.